Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to an Oak Harbor City Council workshop. This is a regular workshop meeting. Today is September 25th. It is 5 p.m. So I'd like to start our meeting off with an introduction of those here at the table, and welcome to those of you watching and here in the audience. I'm Bob Severance, Oak Harbor Mayor.
Bill Larson, City Council.
Rick Allenberg, City Council.
Joel Servadius, City Council.
Blaine Milborn, Oak Harbor City Administrator.
Jim Wiesner, City Council.
Erica Wassinger, City Council.
Welcome. Okay, we'll start off this evening with our Development Services Department and invite them to the table to join us here and introduce themselves. We have 4 items to be discussed under Development Services. We have our Director, Steve Powers, and
Ray Lindenberg, Associate Planner.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. Today I am going to discuss with you briefly the Historic Preservation Commission Code Amendments. As you know, last year we went through the process of becoming a certified local government by adopting a historic preservation ordinance. During that time, when we were going through the process of adopting that code, the State Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation gave us a model code to work with. And during that process, they apparently changed the code a little bit. And so we had some things that were a little bit outdated from their standpoint. A DAP representative came and gave us a training at the Historic Preservation Commission meeting and kind of went over some of the things that were in our code and recommended a few changes. And also through the process of us having met over the past 9 months or so, we've kind of come up with a couple of changes that might need to be made as well with regard to the number of members of the commission and things like that. So what we have is a draft historic preservation code. What we did is just included the entire code for reference. I will talk to you about the changes specifically in each of those. On page 5 of your workshop packet there are a couple of changes. The significant one is changing from 7 members to 5. We've had a little bit of a struggle filling up 7 positions. The trainer from DAP suggested that we go down to 5 because that seems to be what cities of our size do. So we're recommending that change. To go along with that, under 1850-040, number 3, it talks about terms and how the terms get staggered. So we just have changed from 3 members serving 2 years to 1 member serving 2 years. It'll help stagger those terms into a way that's kind of spreads out the expiration date of those terms. Moving on to packet page 7, in 1850-050, section 1, and the last one there, the DAP trainer told us that we need to remove section L, so that has been removed entirely. That is no longer the case. It's not immediately listed on the Oak Harbor Register of Historic Places if it's on the National Register. Also, further down in section 2, we have changed it to kind of ease some of the burden on the City Council to allow for people who have nominated a single structure to be approved and admitted to the Historic Register through approval of the Historic Preservation Commission, not to bring that forward each time when those comes in to the City Council. We feel like, especially in the initial kind of excitement of people doing that, that might be a little bit of a burden for the City Council to have a bunch of properties come across for that. However, we did leave it so that if there is a historic district proposed, that would still be coming before the City Council, because that doesn't require 100% approval from the property owners. If it's in a district, that doesn't mean that all of the property owners are on board with that, so we want that still to go to the City Council for a public hearing. And actually, that is the extent of the changes. So those are the changes that we have drafted, and what we're planning on doing is bringing that back to you for a formal approval, review and approval at a future City Council meeting.
Which I think is actually the October 1st one.
That is correct, yes. Thank you.
So that'll be our next meeting.
Yes.
Okay? Yes, Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, looking over these, the only question I had and you answered it is, so is there, as to why it's being removed, but is there any back history on the 1L where they changed it and we're removing from, if it was listed in the National Register, it's immediately listed in the City of Oak Harbor Register. Is there any history as to why they recommended we pull that out?
I am not certain of that, but I can find out for you.
Okay, not that I'm against pointing out, it was just curious. And,
Yeah.
And the other thing that you said, I'm all for streamlining the process. I don't believe it would have been an undue burden on us. We're paid to be here, but I do like the idea that yes, for a single home, if it's brought up and somebody wants to be on it, and the people who are on this commission, it's their job to find out, well, ought it be there or not.
Yeah.
I think that's great that we don't have to make every decision on every home. I'm all for, again, streamlining the process and allowing these things to move forward. So thank you very
Sure.
much for
Yep.
the background and the work getting this to where we can approve the changes.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. That'll conclude item number A, so we'll go to B.
Give me that stack of papers.
Land use approvals and hearing examiner approval code changes.
That's my item, Mr. Mayor. So we had a short summary statement in the agenda packet for you. I won't bother to go through that. What I do have is a PowerPoint presentation to give council some background on the use of a hearing examiner process. I know that some of you have some level of familiarity, but I thought it'd be appropriate for everybody to start at the same sort of starting point. And then talk about what's possible with a hearing examiner, talk about what Oak Harbor already does with a hearing examiner, and then lay out a couple of changes that the council might want to consider in terms of how you could further utilize that process in the land use permit approval process. So, without further ado, quick slide there to give you a sense of what I'm going to try to cover this afternoon or this evening. A little bit about state law, what we do right now, a touch on what some other communities do, maybe talk about some possible changes, pros and cons, and then wrap it up. So, in general, cities get their authority to utilize the hearing examiner process, as you might expect from state law. That's the appropriate state law up there, 35A 63-170. It essentially allows the hearing examiner to take the place of the planning commission in quasi-judicial decision making, and then the hearing examiner actually eliminates the need to have a separate board of adjustment to hear variances and conditional use permits. Further in that state law, it tells cities what they can assign to their hearing examiner should they choose to have one. And of course, we do have one. You can assign them site-specific rezones, or sometimes you'll hear those referred to as quasi-judicial rezones. So those are ones on specific pieces of property rather than area-wide. A whole series of other kind of land use permits, conditional uses, variances, subdivision plats, shoreline permits. And this is a key piece for you, I think, or any other class of land use application that we might have in our code. And then we can certainly send appeals of staff decisions to the hearing examiner, and we also can have SEPA appeals heard by a hearing examiner. And so the state law then says, further breaks that down and says, well, okay, what kind of decision will a hearing examiner make? And there are some choices available to communities. You can have what might be referred to as the final administrative decision, or you can think of final staff decision. So the hearing examiner can make that, and we can have an appeal process that would go to the council. In that case, it would be a closed record review, and you're familiar with that process. We can have the hearing examiner conduct a hearing and make a recommendation to the council. And I know you're familiar with that. We just went through that not that long ago. Again, you conduct that closed record review, take your final action. Or you can actually assign the hearing examiner to have the final legislative decision, or basically the final decision of the city. In that case, any appeals of that decision would go straight to Superior Court through the LUPA process. So what is our current practice? Well, not everybody probably is aware of the fact that we've had a hearing examiner in place since roughly 2003. So 2001, 2002, we spent a lot of time reworking our permit process code, and then one of the last steps is we put into place the use of a hearing examiner. At that time, the city had a separate board of adjustment that went away. We put the hearing examiner in its place, and we also utilized it for some other appeals that I'll mention here in just a moment. Our authority for the office comes from a particular section or chapter within the municipal code, and the types of matters that are heard by that hearing examiner are also established by our code. And this is a key point that I want to make both here and just sort of more broadly, is that all of the different permit decisions that we have are governed by our municipal code. We look to that to tell us, is this something that staff has the authority to decide? Is it something that has to go to the planning commission for a hearing? Is it has to go just to the council? Where does it go? And oftentimes you as council might hear questions, well, why can't it just go to this body or to this person? The answer is because the code prescribes where we're going to do that. It's not a decision that we make on an ad hoc basis. So Chapter 1840 gives us the authority to establish the office of the hearing examiner. And the purpose is, as you can see, is to establish a system of land use regulatory controls which satisfy some basic needs. We want to separate the regulatory function from the planning process. We want to absolutely be sure that we have procedural due process and adherence to the appearance of fairness doctrine. We also want to have as efficient and effective land use regulatory system as we can possibly have. So within that chapter, it establishes the function of the hearing examiner, sets the limits of his or her authority, determines the rules and procedures that they're going to follow, standards for written decisions, and various other administrative details. So that's sort of the nuts and bolts of it, if you will. We look to other sections in our code to tell us what are the things that the hearing examiner, which in this case is a he, so if I use that pronoun, please forgive me, what are the types of things that he currently hears for us? Well, type 3 permits. So those are conditional uses and variances. So remember back to a few slides, those are specifically some things that the state law allows us to assign to the hearing examiner. And those are ones where he has the final decision. There is no appeal within the city process. It would go to Superior Court through the LUPA process if someone wanted to appeal it. Similarly, there are some type 4 review processes that are heard by the hearing examiner. Again, quasi-judicial rezones, site-specific, and then certain site plan reviews, which are generally those large and or complex ones that under our code require a hearing. So in those cases, the hearing examiner makes the recommendation to the council. Council then, as you know, makes your decision after a closed record review. So here's one of my key questions for you to keep in mind as we go through this is, should this portion of the process change? These are the ones that I think probably even people who are familiar with our hearing examiner process would probably not realize these are also things assigned to that office. There are certain general appeals that are assigned under Chapter 1.24 of our code, code enforcement appeals, fire code, whole range of building code appeals go to the hearing examiner, certain zoning code issues, sign code variances, and then finally rounding out the list, critical areas, reasonable use determinations are something decided by the hearing examiner. Related to this, only because it's something that staff thinks that perhaps the council might want to consider as you think about how you utilize the hearing examiner process, are preliminary plats. Now, currently our code is structured in a way that the Planning Commission conducts those hearings, they forward the recommendation on to you. That's that type 4 process that you've heard me speak about often. And again, as you well know, you do that, the closed record review and make the decision. So here's another question for you. If you're going to think about the role of the hearing examiner and potentially expanding that, is this an area where you may also want to utilize those provisions in state law and assign work to the hearing examiner? Well, what are other cities doing? I think over the last decade or so, it's been pretty clear that the trend is eliminating counsel in the decisions and in the appeal process, and I think the reasons for that will be clear here in a moment. I did have access to some older data from WCIA, as you can see, 2011, and at that time there were 91 cities that were part of that risk management pool, and 74 of them had a hearing examiner system, and 40 of those, so more than half of it, had the hearing examiner as the last decision maker, or the final decider, if you will. So if we think about in general and what we see in other jurisdictions, what are those things which are commonly heard by the hearing examiner? As you can probably guess, the ones with the red check marks are ones that we are already doing. The ones with the question marks are the ones that are not currently assigned to the hearing examiner under our code in terms of being the final decider. So we're in line with the majority of other communities that are using a hearing examiner process. Again, there are a couple other places where you might want to think about expanding that. So what might those changes look like? Well, one would be that you could potentially assign the final decision-making authority to the hearing examiner for those site plans which require a public hearing. I didn't put all of those parameters up there, but again, they are generally the really large ones or the incredibly complex ones, or a combination of those factors. Another place that you might want to consider, it would be preliminary plats, and I would also tag on there the planned residential development, because they are a similar review process, and those work with plats very frequently together. Potentially, you could look at assigning the hearing to the hearing examiner with the decision by the council, which is sort of similar to the current process. Or you could think about assigning the final decision-making authority to the hearing examiner. Why might you do any of those things? Well, again, we go back to separating the quasi-judicial from the legislative function. And as the council knows, that can be kind of tough to do at times. You're both the policy makers, and it can be challenging to sit in the role of the panel of judges when you're also the ones who are making the policy. It frees the policymakers to act on the long-term planning and the lawmaking functions rather than in the site-specific permit decision-making business. I think it's fairly well accepted that it reduces the number of appeals and judicial challenges. It clearly provides protection for constitutional due process rights, because our hearing examiner is a trained land use professional by code, and they have to have an extensive background in land use matters in order to even be in that position. And it frankly reduces the likelihood of liability for legal damages. What are some of the cons that we typically hear when we talk about using a hearing examiner? Particularly making a change and expanding the role of your hearing examiner? Well, there's going to be an increased upfront cost to the city likely. Our current process, we have a contract on an annual basis, so we pay a flat monthly rate regardless of the number of applications or the complexity of the applications. So if we were to significantly add to that caseload, we would probably want to think about renegotiating that contract at the appropriate point. The hearing examiner is going to apply the code as it is written, as would a judge, and not necessarily as intended or as what might be politically popular. And sometimes we hear, particularly from members of the public, that they perceive it as a loss of local control. Again, that's a little bit challenging from the staff perspective, because whether it's the planning commission, the council, or a hearing examiner, the task is the same. It's to apply the code to the project, but somehow there is a sense that a loss of local control if you have an independent hearing person conducting those reviews. So from a summary perspective, state law allows cities to assign a wide variety of permit decisions to a hearing examiner. We currently use one for a great number of our permits and appeals already. Recent circumstances may indicate additional use of the hearing examiner is desirable, and we're really interested in your thoughts on this as to whether this is something you'd like to see us dig into a little bit more for you. So with that, I'll be happy to try to answer any of your questions.
Councilor Watson.
So you mentioned we pay a contract, just a monthly flat rate fee. So do we use the hearing examiner every month?
We don't. There are two ways to do this. You can pay by the case.
Yeah, that's what my next question was going
Right.
to be.
I think there are two typical ways. You pay by the case, or you pay on an annual contract basis.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge with paying by the case is that when you have unusually large ones or complex ones, which require an extraordinary amount of time, both in preparation and in hearing and in the follow-up, you're likely going to pay way more than what you're paying on a monthly basis if we're just paying basically a retainer, for lack of a better word. Mm-hmm. And so that's way back when the people who were in your chairs in 2003-ish timeframe decided that we were going to go with the annual contract, and that's just worked very well for us over the years, and it's actually stayed pretty flat for the vast majority of the years. in terms of the rate that's being charged.
Yes, Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I've got a couple of thoughts on this, but I have a couple of questions first. Steve, are you aware how many decisions or recommendations that have been put forth by the hearing examiner that the city council over the years has overturned or gone a different way?
I don't think that there have been any.
Okay.
And to be honest, though, we don't have a lot of applications that rise to the level of the hearing examiner conducting the hearing on behalf of the council. I can think of only maybe a handful at best.
Okay, and then second, of those decisions that have been made by the hearing examiner and that the city council subsequently approved, which sounds like all of them, do we have an idea of how many of those actually were appealed to LUPA, the Land Petition Act process, and if any of those were overturned there?
We've only had one appeal, and it's the current appeal.
Okay, so before now there have
That's
been
correct.
no others. And you say 40 of 74 of the localities who have hearing examiners use the hearing examiner as the final?
As the final decider, yes.
Okay, so for me, I'd be more than happy to have you, as the city staff, look into expanding the role of the hearing examiner. The only concern I had, which might be shared by others, is the loss of local control. But when you think about it, our code is our local control, and our code is controlled by the city council. So just like in this case right now, we're looking at changing that code to ensure that the desires, the vision of the city is carried out by the administration of that code. It's our job to change that code. So I don't look at this as being a loss of local control, because we still have the tools, the mechanism by which to drive that local control. So like I said, for me, I'm happy to have you move forward and look into expanding the role of the hearing.
Thank you for those comments, and that's why I use the word perception, because it is the perception that it's a loss of local control, but you're absolutely correct, and which is why I said whether it's a planning commission or the council or the hearing examiner, you're all tasked with applying the code to the project in front of you. And so you're right that if we don't like the answer the code is giving us, we treat it like a math problem. We don't like the answer, then change the variables. And in this case, the variable is the code.
Thank you.
Councilor Olmberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, Mr. Powers, I do not have a strong opinion one way or the other at the moment about changing this. The one concern that I have about changing it is often our decisions will come with conditions, and our code is not prescriptive with respect to the conditions. I like to see the final decision by the hearing examiner. I also take a look at the conditions. Can you comment on that, to what exposure or what ability we have to modify conditions?
I'll try to get to that, but let me start in a different place if you would allow me, which is in all of these cases, the hearing examiner starts with a staff report from the staff, and we are the ones who proposes, at least initially, all of the conditions of approval, right? And so hearing examiner, just like the planning commission or the council, is free to accept our conditions of approval, modify them or reject them, or add his or her own. And so I think the process is working the way that I think you think it is, say it that way. So in our typical, let's just choose a conditional use permit. We have the staff analysis, we do all of the analysis, we look at the criteria in the code, we determine whether we think there should be these conditions of approval to help that conditional use permit meet all the conditions of the code, and then we propose that to the hearing examiner. In the conduct of his hearing, he would ask the applicant, have you read those conditions? Can you satisfy them? Are you comfortable with them? And he gets the answers from the applicant. He may add some to them himself, the hearing examiner, if he feels that we've missed the mark somewhere, or if he thinks we've overextended, he might choose to delete one of those. But once the hearing examiner, in that sense, approves the conditional use permit, then those conditions are, the only way those are going to be reviewed would be through the LUPA process. So it's fairly similar to, I think, what you're accustomed to experiencing. Yeah.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Councilor Servadius?
Thank you. I'm a little conflicted on this one. I'd be thrilled to get out of the quasi-judicial process because when we go through the colloquy, it's, trying to recall any conversation. I mean, we are conversation magnets. That's our job, to be a liaison out there. So when someone walks up and says, hey, do you have 5 minutes? That's our job. And yet trying to recall any conversation of merit that you had when you go through the ex parte conversation disclosure is very difficult, and it's hard. I feel like it's hard to do our job when we fill that role. So I'm happy to get out of it, but I echo really both of my peers sitting here. Their sentiments, as far as, or maybe Mr. Allenberg's, on the loss of control. I don't know if I have the total degree of confidence that Mr. Larson said. With we'd like to think we're going to catch something. We had an example that recently occurred where we may not have caught everything as we thought the ordinances intended and the law that was written before we came along was intended. So I don't know where I'm at on this one just yet. Like I say, I'd love to get out of this business in the quasi-judicial arena, but
So if I could help with, I understand your concern, and I would respectfully suggest to the council that the time to come to the time to address your conclusion that something has been missed in the code is not when that application is in front of you, because you're not allowed, as you've learned, you're not allowed to say, gosh, we really wish the rules would do this, let's just apply this rule now to this application. The concept of vesting when it comes in, when the application comes in, the day that it's determined to complete that's the day that we determine which rules apply. And so whether good, bad, or indifferent, the rules we have are the ones we have to apply at that particular situation. If we discover later on in time that we really wish these rules did something else, we have to go back and change the rules. We can't affect that application.
sure. Let's talk money for a minute. So we said we pay a flat fee or an annual contract versus a by the case, or is it hourly? How do we determine what that fee would be other than an annual contract?
Usually I think that it's an hourly fee per, and then it's just number of hours on those cases. Because there's no way in that case for them to predict the complexity one way or the other.
So how would we ever compare, for example, an 1,100 page packet? We have no idea it was 10 hours spent, 400 hours, sifting through all of the information. I mean, how do we know how much time is being, there was no feedback in that most recent interaction as to all of the testimony that was submitted. I didn't see any, except for the summary, any in-depth analysis of those arguments. So I wonder, how do we go back, and does it make sense to maybe, if we're not doing that many of these, should we be doing a per case basis versus an annual fee?
Certainly something that we can explore. One of the things that I think that Patricia would like us to talk about is the predictability of budgeting. So when it comes to my department's budget, when I have an annual contract for a fixed amount, we know how to budget for that through the budget process. I have no way of predicting how many cases we may or may not hear in a year, nor can I tell how complex they might be. So for instance, if we as a city were using a per case method, and I had not anticipated something like a Lehigh case, I'm going to be upside down in my budget pretty quick, probably. Whereas the flat fee contract gives us predictability and gives you as council predictability as you're setting our department's budget.
And I appreciate that. I just wonder, and I'll end with this, if it would give us a little bit more, I don't know if the right word is oversight, it would certainly, I think, put a little more accountability on the person conducting the hearings examiner, because we would then have a very clear accountability as to how many hours were spent per case. Right now, it could be, let's look at staff's recommendations. Those seem logical, great, stamp, let's move on. Thank you for my $5 or $6 or $8 grand a month or whatever we pay this person. So
It's more like 1,700.
okay, so just, it's always worth asking
Sure.
the question.
No, and
I think I stole one of Beth's lines.
to the degree that we can find some information in that, just maybe from some other sources, we'd be happy with
All
it.
right, thanks.
Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you. So, yeah, I really think there's actually a few ways we could possibly address some of these cons. So, the additional costs concern, that would only be if we took there's really two steps here. If we took the additional step of having the hearing examiner start taking on some additional cases, i.e. Non-complicated short plats, items that don't have variances or conditional use. Right now, that presently goes planning commission, then to council for approval, and then if somebody doesn't agree and there was an appeal involved, then to the hearing examiner. What's wrong with that present system in that particular arena?
So actually, Mr. Wiesner, we already have, the hearing examiner already does conditional uses and variances, so that's already wrapped into our fee.
Correct.
Short plats are administrative.
Correct.
Right? We haven't had appeals on short plats in my time here, so we have a pretty good track record on the short plat side of things. Really the only differences that I would see would be, again, these complex site plans, which do not come up very often. I think there probably only been 2 or 3 in 15 years or so, and so that probably wouldn't add significantly to our annual contract cost. The potential change, I think, would be the preliminary plats. If we were fortunate enough to find ourselves in a position where we were doing more plats on an annual basis, then I think it'd be reasonable for the hearing examiner to expect that we would talk about maybe changing that contract.
But presently, we have that system in place that it does not involve the hearing examiner for certain stuff. And what we're suggesting, I thought from the presentation, was adding some additional responsibility, shifting some of the decisions that are currently done by planning commission recommendation to council. I thought we were talking about 2 separate things there, right?
Right.
And taking some of those items and shifting them to the hearing examiner process. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is in those things that are not the complex things, those things that do not involve variances, those things that do not involve conditional uses that we are currently handling as a council, is there a problem with that current system? Why are we looking at handling that responsibility over?
So the council doesn't handle any of the things that you're talking about, sir. The only things that...
Again, I understand that. I understand right now that the hearing examiner handles all of that stuff.
No, sir, he does. Maybe that's where I'm not understanding, or I'm not being clear.
Okay.
So, presently, the hearing examiner conducts the hearing on that complex site plan, and you folks make the decision. That's the only part that's sort of parallel to our current process. You could think about leaving the decision down at his level, and so then it doesn't come to you for the closed record review like you just did a few weeks ago. Since we were talking about this, we suggested that perhaps you think about the plats and changing the hearing authority, taking the planning commission out of that process and assigning it to the hearing examiner. You could still be the ones who make the decision on the plat, or you could say that the hearing examiner can make that decision. But as it stands right now, the council is only involved in closed record reviews for long plats, let's use that old term, the long plats and these complex site plans.
And I understand that, and that's why I'm saying that's where the extra cost is coming in, is with that suggested change.
So the reason that this item is on your agenda this evening is that we had some indication from 1 or 2 of your colleagues that you might be interested in this conversation. Staff is fine from a certain perspective in maintaining the process the way that it is. There are obviously some legal protections for the council and for the city if we fully implement a hearing examiner process, and that's part of your decision making, your risk management decision making. But you can stay exactly the way that it is right now, and we'd stay with the same contract cost.
But again, we're talking about 2 separate issues here, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding this clearly. We actually have 2 separate discussions we're having within this. One is a discussion about moving some responsibilities that are currently planning commission recommendations to the council, and then the council is the final approval, albeit any appeals or anything that would go on to the hearing examiner. That's one discussion we're having. And the second discussion we're having is about those items which currently the hearing examiner currently oversees, which are the complex items, the appeals, the conditional uses, etc. Having those items, determining whether those are recommendations and come to the council. So
Well,
there's
no,
really 2
sir.
separate items.
No, we're not proposing that at all. I'm not proposing, and neither is legal staff proposing, to change any of the hearing examiner's current duties in
I understand, but
in these things.
it's the process, the process at the end. Again, I have this clear in my mind, I must not be articulating it properly. We have two separate entities we're talking about. Two separate suggestions on the table. The change in the hearing examiner being that administrative final decision that goes straight to LUPA, or whether the process that we're following now. I mean, we're having a process discussion, but we're also having a discussion about adding additional duties to the hearing examiner that currently aren't things that he is involved in. That's where the additional cost is coming from, correct? We're having two separate discussions.
Sort of. This,
Okay.
now I understand, I think.
Okay?
Okay. You would potentially incur additional costs a little bit if you said to the hearing examiner, we want you to be the final decider on site plans. Because right now, he already has that role to conduct the hearing for you. He writes his recommendation. It's a pretty short thing to change it from a recommendation to his decision. Okay, so that's really probably not a significant cost
Minimal
change,
cost.
if any. Okay, use your word, that's a process change.
Correct.
Right? We're gonna take you folks out of it, say the buck stops with him on those site plans. Where I see a potential for a little bit more of a cost increase, again, depending on the number of applications, would be if he was to be involved in preliminary plats, because that's not a role that he currently has.
And I guess back to my question, what's the problem with the current process of preliminary plats? Why are we looking at,
There's no real problem other than these particular, let's go to this slide here. Planning Commission is a fantastic body that does a great job. And as you folks know, particularly some of you who have served on the Planning Commission, they work very, very hard, but they are citizens. And as citizens, it's tough to be responsible for some of the more complex quasi-judicial hearings and recommendations. That's the only reason we've brought this up, is because there are many communities, again, using the 2011 data, 74 that are part of WCIA, more than half of them use the hearing examiner as the final decider, is because they're separating their planning commission. They're saying, let's just have you do the legislative stuff. Let's have you help us with our comp plans and our codes and our master plans and our sub-area plans and all of those things. But we're not going to have you do the quasi-judicial. We're going to assign that to a land use professional, an attorney by trade, land use attorney, oftentimes they're judges. So that's the only reason that we raised that issue this afternoon, is if you're going to consider maybe adjusting how you folks participate in the permit process and where you get your recommendations and whether that you get the recommendation or not, we thought we'd put the Planning Commission on the table.
well, I would think that I'm actually kind of running down the middle here, because I think, quite frankly, if we remove that portion of this discussion and we focus upon the quasi-judicial process item of this, which not adding additional items to a hearing examiner slate. In other words, we continue on with the current system we have for common plats, for things that are straightforward, non-complex, not asking for variances, because the reality is variances come into play quite often in the more complex stuff, and that shoots right over our head, right? But when we're having a straightforward plat that is following the city code and it's going to the Planning Commission and it's coming to the council recommendation, I think number one, we're keeping control of those simple things and understanding that, I get it, we're not attorneys, we're not land use guys and stuff, but when it comes to the straightforward stuff, the ones that are following the code and not asking for these variances and complicated things, I think that system's working fine, which would then not result in any or very minimal upfront cost to the city. It would remove that con. Granted, interpreting code as written, not necessarily as intended or politically popular, well, unfortunately, that's there's certain cases when, you know, we gotta take a little heed, right? And there is, I think, a process for if, in a simple short plat, if somebody feels as though we, as a city council, did not interpret the code as written, there is an appeal process for that to the hearing examiner, who is,
No, I'm sorry, it doesn't go to the hearing
Goes to
exam.
LUPA?
Goes to LUPA. And I feel somewhat compelled to say there really aren't simple plats anymore. The short plats, yes, because by definition, those are administrative and they are 9 lots. It can't get too bad with 9 lots. But given the complexity of land use regulations, the overlapping jurisdictions of the different agencies we're involved with, I know you are probably sick of hearing the stormwater drum being beat, but there are lots of complexities with plats these days. When you also then layer on the fact that by GMA's approach, we're tasked with infill and densifying areas where maybe surrounding neighbors aren't interested in densification, the complexities really sort of ratchet up. So I think our days of relatively simple plats are gone, but I take your point.
so, but you see where I'm saying, I think there's a happy medium here. So
Again, these are just the full range of ideas to throw out there.
I will say I totally support the concept of a process change in the quasi judicial. I mean, it's clear based upon the research I've done, and certainly don't intend to think that I'm a lawyer by any means, but there's very, very clear cases out there that all point that system having us at the end of it doesn't really do anything for us. The current process as it is written adds, quite frankly, an unnecessary step that does expose the city. And when it comes to complicated land use actions, to think that we are smarter than somebody who does it for a living and obviously can interpret the same record that's in front of us, because no additional input is allowed, in a different fashion than somebody who does it for a living is a hard one to swallow, to think that is logical. So I know that's the reason the vast majority of the cities in the state have gone that route, and I'm total support of that. I just don't know where I'm at on the whole.
And I have some ideas as I'm listening to your comments. I have some ideas of how I could present some information in a different fashion. So what I'd like to suggest to the council is that we get this back up on a future workshop agenda. Probably won't be next month, knowing some of the things that we've got in the pipeline downstairs. But let us take all of this input, prepare some additional information for you folks. I think I've got an idea how I might organize it a little bit differently, and then we'll take your temperature again and see which ones you might be really interested in us in moving forward, if any.
Okay. 2 comments. I remember a LUPA at Pier Point.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. I thought there was one other I
Yeah,
didn't
no,
know.
you're
Yeah,
absolutely right.
at least that I remember. But
Apparently I'm trying to block that one out.
yeah. And I can understand that. I can understand that. So, and the other thing I'm wondering about is when you do bring this back, we've had Mr. Bombek doing this since 2003.
Yes,
I
sir.
think I heard you say. I'm kind of curious if there are others in our area who are doing this work. Just kind of to know if there are alternatives
Yeah, we can see.
that we might want to consider.
I might tap the city attorney's office to help me figure out who practices as a hearing examiner in this area.
I think Mr. Bobbing's done a great job.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not saying he hasn't, so. Okay, then
Thank
we'll
you.
move on.
Yes, thank you.
You're out of time, by the way. I just,
Yeah,
no,
I was.
no
out of
pressure,
time
but,
And probably out of line
Well-
as well.
No.
So Ray will help pick up some steam for me here, and he'll do his item in 30 seconds.
oh, great. Design guidelines, item C. Good luck, Ray.
Okay, thank you. So much pressure. Okay, so as you're aware, the Oak Harbor Main Street Association submitted a request to take a look at design and use regulations in the CBD district. We took a look through that and went to the Planning Commission a couple of times to discuss that document that they submitted to us. We were able to go through and with those discussions and staff discussion, kind of separate it out into separate, two different paths essentially, one for the uses and one for the design guidelines. And the design guidelines that we came up with kind of took our existing DRG document, our design regulations and guidelines document, and beefed it up. We added a lot more detail to the Harborside area. We retitled it Old Town to match our comp plan designation for the area. We added a lot more information and just, like I said, detail. And so what happened last night is that this was going to go to the Planning Commission. However, the new director of the Oak Harbor Main Street Association requested that we continue it to a future meeting so that she could take a closer look at it and bounce it off of the original drafter of the Main Street Association document. And so we have gone ahead and done that. The Planning Commission did continue that to the next meeting. And so what I've done here is just included the existing design regulations and guidelines document in its entirety and the proposed revisions that we had that we're going to present to the Planning Commission last night. So what I ask of you is just take a look at both of those. The reason I gave you the full document is to kind of give you the context of how this all fits in and how it all works together. Because the Main Street Association document included a lot of things that were in other parts of our DRG. And so I want to make sure that that was kind of understood, that a lot of the things are in there, they're just in different places. So anyway, to keep it short, we will be bringing this back at a future date after the Planning Commission has had a chance to get input from the Main Street Association and any changes or input that you might have as well. I am more than willing to take and incorporate into the draft. And then we'll bring it back after the Planning Commission has a crack at it, and we can discuss it then in much greater detail. I'll have a full presentation then.
Okay, any questions or input? Okay, seeing none, we will move on then. Thank you.
Thanks for saving it.
Appreciate it, Ray. Thank you. That was quick. We will move on to item number D, Shoreline Master Program Periodic Review, DOE grant.
I'll try to keep mine just as quick as Ray's.
Oh, good, senior planner.
Good evening, Council.
Mr. Lefevre.
Dennis Lefevre, Senior Planner. Actually, a little bit of good news this evening. Uncharacteristically, and not like our critical areas ordinance, which was a major effort, or the low impact development regulation update, we are actually being offered some grant funds for our Shoreline Master Program periodic review through the Department of Ecology. So what we're asking is that you take a look at this proposal and authorize staff to make application for these funds. The amount that's being offered us is $22,400. It's not a large amount of cash, but it sure is going to help. It's a no-match grant, so it's basically fill in the boxes and sign the application, and we're assured of having that grant sent to us. What we're looking at doing is, I included in your packet in RFP, at least a draft RFP, is looking at getting a consultant on board that will help us analyze kind of one of our more sensitive areas of our shoreline, and that's the residential bluff conservancy designation. That's the area on the kind of the west side of our shoreline. There's been a lot of issues regarding that sensitive area, so what we'd like to do is get a consultant on board who has the expertise to let us know how our policies and regulations regarding that designation and our municipal code regulations in our critical areas preserve the function and the value of that sensitive area, as well as balance that with the property owners. So, and that's what we're looking at doing with some of those funds from that grant. We also, based on the grant, will receive 1 extra year in this process. I think Ecology was looking at, well, it's a tough turnaround time to get the funds and then get a consultant solicitation process moving forward. So they're going to give us an extra year. So our deadline for this project now is June of 2021. So that kind of widens it out a little bit for us. This will come back to you at your, I have October 1st, but that's not going to be doable. I think October 15th meeting for your authorization to have us move forward with the application. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Councilor Olmberg.
Reaching into my mental memory bank, which is really good, you've got to know that by now. We were paid something in the neighborhood of $122,000 for doing our shoreline master plan about 5 years ago. Steve, can you remember that?
I don't think it was quite that much, but for the main
It was
update
a hundred plus
that
thousand.
we did for the one, it was the 2012 update, because that was a major overhaul for every jurisdiction. And so that one, the state actually did fund.
And on this one, we're just going for the review.
Yes.
It only applies to the Fred Marsh South, to the
No.
city limits?
We have to look at the entire SMP, but what we're suggesting here is because this grant amount is not the larger amount that we had back in 2010, 11, and 12, that we would like to use these funds on a more focused study within the residential Bluff Conservancy area.
So-
But Dennis is still reviewing the entire SMP to make sure that it's consistent with the current state law, et cetera.
So where's the money coming from to do the entire review?
There is no money to do the entire, the 22,400 is it.
We have that in the budget for the SMP?
No, that's a grant,
Yeah.
so we budgeted $0 because we're not spending any of our money.
We're using existing staff, so it's already budgeted.
Okay, all right. Answered my question. I thought I could find another $100,000 out of the DOE someplace.
I like the way you're thinking, but,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you, that's all I had.
Sounds like you need to make a drive down there.
Have a little chat with him.
Yeah.
All right. And I
All
think
right.
we intend to put this on your consent agenda, just to make things as simple as possible when we get to October 15th.
Okay, questions? Any others? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we are now going to our next section, finance. Utilities proposed code amendments and efficiencies. We have our finance director, Patricia Soul. And I'll let Patricia introduce Chaz.
This is Chaz. She's our finance manager for utilities. And I'm going to be handing out some stuff for you guys. Take one and pass it on. Chaz is going to lead this discussion as this is her place she lives.
This is my first
That
time
is weird.
ever doing this, so
She'll do great.
I know a lot of you.
Have you been given a guide on that tonight?
Okay. Oh, all right. Okay. Good evening, council members and Mr. Mayor.
All right, so tonight we're going to talk about utilities. I want to try to keep it lively as much as possible for you. So our guiding principles, customer service, definitely priority for us, most definitely focused on it. As Patricia mentioned, I lived here quite a while, so it's important to me that the utility customers are taken care of. And whatever it is that they've got an issue with, we listen and we try to make things right for them. Code compliance, all services are provided by finance, they're guided by GASB.
GAP.
GAP. State RCWs, municipal code, and our policies, of course. So our utility services that are provided, Public Works, they are, and thank you to Kathy and Rich for providing this information for us, but they, of course, take care of the infrastructure. They review installation and inspections provided for the new construction for the utility services that are needed. They're provided as far as the sewer, the water, the
Jazz,
storm drain.
could you speak a little, like,
Oh,
move it right over there with?
sorry.
Yeah. There you go.
Can't get to that. Oh,
Thank you.
okay, very good. Oh, can you hear me now? Okay, good. Let me drop this down a little bit. All right, so we've got proposed service plan review to city standards and municipal code, installation of services, inspection of contractor installed services. This is all public works, of course. Services are started or stopped for changes in occupancy, emergency request, delinquency, or non-payment. New account setup or closeout reads are performed by our wonderful public works staff. They do occupancy audits for us, delinquency and non-payment, physical notification, door hangers, we're going to talk more about that. The water shut off and turn on for non-payment, and then the water shut off or turn on for emergency requests, which are done within that 24-hour period. They also provide troubleshooting, water conservation. They take care of any customer service concerns on the field. Oh, sorry. Okay. They, of course, look at high consumption audits. They contact the customer. So they're our field, the public works staff. They go out and take care of customers on the field. If we've got water leak investigations that need to take place, customers contact us, let us know there's an issue, or our public works department also will spot an issue. They will contact that customer. They are part of our process for authorization of a leak billing adjustment. They also take a look at zero consumption audits. The edit list also, they investigate any errors that may be in the meter reading, and then, of course, correct those reads. The meters and the meter reading equipment are maintained, tested, and read by the Public Works Department, and that information, of course, is shared with Finance. Thank you. So, finance side of the table, we take care of billing for the sewer, the water, the storm drain, the solid waste. We also deal with the issuance and renewal of licenses, whether they're the animal or the business licenses. We also do the collection of the bills. Invoices are mailed to us. We also issue invoices as far as finance department. And then those bills, if they're not paid, we follow the processes that are described by the state RCW and our municipal code. So how to open an account with us. So we're going to go through our code. The first is 3.95040. We have an actual paper application. Customers cannot sign up for service online because our code states it's in writing. So there's not a way to go online to do that. And I have found when I spoke with a lot of neighboring cities, they also follow the same, which is a paper form. It's signed by the customer. They provide identification to us when they sign up. And there's also a $25 account initiation fee that we do collect, and that is prior to activation of the utility. They can pay that in person, over the phone. Sometimes we do have instances where we do bill it, and that's just as a courtesy because sometimes they're not here to pay us in person. Or someone has a power of attorney and they're taking care of it for them. The next municipal code 3.95050, that requires that the owner or the agent open the account. Agent could be a tenant, property manager, or designated by the owner, power of attorney. It does state that the owner is liable for the payment of that unpaid utility bill. Next slide. This gives you an idea of how those payments are applied as we receive them. So this is built into our Eden billing program. So once we receive that payment, it will be applied in that order as to the balance. This is talking about our utility services that are billed under code 3.95070. So we bill monthly. There are some cities that still bill bi-monthly, but we bill monthly. Our billing cycle starts on the 21st, closes on the 20th of the month, and then it's payable no later than the 18th of the following month. And after the 18th, it is considered delinquent. So our next code, 395070, we do charge an interest rate on that unpaid balance of 0.67% monthly. There's also a late fee that is $15. That's per our master fee schedule. That also is added in addition to that 0.67%. Roughly, it's anywhere from $15 to $17 additional to the bill. This code 395080 also states that the water turn-off is 7 to 10 days after the notice is given. We are within that, which I will go into more detail here in a little bit. It does specify that we need full payment to not be shut off. That means that original bill amount, the principal bill amount, needs to be paid in full in order to avoid shut off. They are advised they can request a hearing. We do have a form where the customer can fill out that request for hearing. Advise additional fees can be added after the water is cut off, and currently the disconnection fee is $10. That's per our master fee schedule. So other fees and charges in the utilities, just briefly go through the remaining portion of the code. We've got the hearing process that's described in the code, the water cutoff for lien enforcement. I'm going to go into more detail on these as we continue. Disconnection of water service, the charges must be paid before reconnect. Again, that's that original bill. And we actually, the $10 fee, now I found that some cities want to have that disconnection fee paid prior to reconnecting. We do not do that. We just ask that they pay that original bill amount, and then we reconnect. Low income, there is a code in there for low income persons, and it is a 17% off of the meter service charge, the garbage, which is a 20-gallon garbage fee, and the sewer. And it's roughly about $22 off of the bill. Security deposits for service and late fees. At this point, we're not across the board requiring deposits. That $25 account initiation fee, it is required for each new account, but there is not a deposit that is required. If there are any billing error, there's that appeal process. Oh, bless you. And we do have the form for that as well. NSF check fees are $40 per our master fee schedule. And then the very last code there, unpaid balances or delinquencies do constitute a lien. So tenant billing, we do allow tenants to open an account as long as we have authorization from the owner. And the owner could be represented by a property manager, but we do call, and if we don't get a hold of them by phone, we will email and get that authorization, and that is to avoid any fraudulent opening of a utility account by someone that doesn't have any legal right to be there. The late notices do go to both the tenant and the owner. As a matter of fact, the owner's copy states owner's copy of tenant bill, so there shouldn't be any mistake that it is not a bill that the owner is expected to pay at that time. It is a bill that has been generated also for the tenant, and the tenant is the responsible account holder at that point. And again, the owner is responsible for any unpaid bills when that tenant moves out. The next slide is about our collection procedures. We do assign debt to collection agencies. Actually, there's just one agency we use at this point. Persons do, they have to pay that reasonable cost of collection or that 10% interest annually. The written notice that's provided to the owner 30 days in advance of assigning to collection, I do that process. So prior to anybody actually getting sent to collections, they do get a 30-day pre-collect notice and are often paid before I have to go to that point of sending them to collections. We do have the option to write off debts not to exceed $2,000 per account over 2 years old when it's no longer cost effective to pursue. That is written into the code. But I can happily say that most people do pay their bills, and we don't have a large list of accounts in collection. How can the customer pay the bill? They can set up auto pay with us, and it deducts from their checking, and it does post that payment to the account on the 18th. The customer still is provided a bill. It's mailed to them each month. On the bill itself, it'll state auto pay, and that confirms that they are signed up for the program. They can pay at our counter, meet any of our cashiers, pay with cash, check, debit, or credit card. They can also drop a check in the drop box to the right side of the entry of City Hall. They can mail a check, and we normally tell people if they're going to mail a check, please allow at least 7 days, 7 to 10 days for the mail system to allow that payment to get here on time. They can also call in, pay with a credit card, or go online and pay through our payment portal. It does require only a credit card at this point, and they do need their account number. We do not have, at this point, which has been requested many times, to have an e-billing format where they can view their actual bill and balances and payments online, but we don't have that available at this point.
But we'll be discussing an option.
We'll be discussing an option for sure. Unpaid bills, so our process to collect this gives you an idea of the time frame. So closed accounts, after 90 days past due, owners do receive that 30-day pre-collect letter, and then at expiration of that 30-day period, I do have to upload it to collections if it's not paid. So that's closed accounts. Now, active accounts, after 8 months past due, owners will receive a 30-day pre-collect letter, and at that expiration of the 30-day period, I would upload that to collections. Also, for active accounts that are subject to disconnection, per the municipal code, they do receive a late penalty notice, the door hanger notice, and a disconnection door hanger on the day of disconnection. And I will say that the door hanger and the disconnection notices are delivered in person physically to the primary entry door of the dwelling. Door hangers, they are delivered by Public Works staff. They physically attach that door hanger to the primary entry of the dwelling. That takes place 10 to 12 days after the late penalty notice was issued to give advance notice of the shutoff. Then the shutoff actually takes place 13 to 15 days after the door hanger advance notice is posted. And again, Public Works physically attaches that door hanger to the property on the date of disconnection. This next slide gives you an idea of averages of what we're delivering, what Public Works is delivering. So we've got an average final door hangers per month, 416. So that takes place, that is what is delivered about 10 to 12 days after our late penalty notice. We have about 416 of them physically attached to doors. The average man hours for hanging those door hangers per month, 22.25. Average man hour cost per door hanger at $40 per hour, $2.14. Average time when water staff receives the door hanger list, 10:30. I'll go into a little bit more detail on why they receive it at 10:30 a.m. Total average accounts on the disconnect list per month, 42.25. And then the total average man hours to disconnect and reconnect water accounts per month is 6.5. Average man hour cost per disconnected, $40 per hour, $6.15. Average time when water staff receives that disconnect list, 10:30 a.m. So again, they're from finance receiving the information from us is about 10:30 in the morning, and then they will begin their process of posting. So our options for change. We're looking at mailing the disconnection notices versus physically placing the door hangers on the dwellings. On the handouts I gave to you, I spoke to several neighboring cities that actually mail the notice to the occupant at the service address as part of their past due notification process. They do not physically post anything to the property. They use the system of mailing that notice. And I can tell you the difference with us at this point. We have a billing address in our system. The billing goes to that address as far as the regular statement. The late penalty notice will go to that billing address. For this, we would have to add into our billing software a mailing that is strictly occupant at the service address, because some of those billing addresses are not at that service address. So we can look at that and make that happen if we get your approval. Water shut-off, after the 15th of the month, which is a payday, we've seen a decline of as much 10 to 20 disconnected accounts. People are able to pay that past due bill nearest that payday. And I gave you guys a handout also for the dates. There's sometimes those dates when it comes to the disconnection, because of the number of days, falls before that payday. Sometimes we're going to look at maybe pushing it to close to a payday so that it helps our public. Late fee versus increasing the disconnect or reconnect charge. Right now, we charge the $10 to disconnect. Other cities, they don't even send a late penalty notice. Instead, they send the disconnection notice at least 7 days in advance of shutoff, and they're charging $50 to $75 to disconnect. We're looking at maybe just having owner accounts versus allowing tenant accounts to be open. We are finding that there are very many cities that do not open tenant accounts. They are primarily owners, and if there is a tenant to bill, they do it as a courtesy, but the account holder name is the owner, matches who the owner is of record. We're looking at the ability for our customers to receive bills electronically, so we're going to talk a little bit about that too. And we are looking to change our office hours to better match Public Works as far as the water read time situation, because what we're running into is a lot of people, because we're open till 5 p.m., they'll come in and they want to open an account. Opening an account is about a 10 to 15 minute process with us, and we also then have to call out a read to Public Works or to the water department so that they can either turn the water on or turn it off. But at any rate, they've got to do a read for us, because we've got to close an account, charge consumption to that closed account in order to open a new account. So we're looking at possibly changing our hours of operations from 8 to 4. That would be optimal for us, because then at 4 o'clock, we are doing the final request for any reads, and it gives water department up until 4:30 to complete that, and then they're within their time frame where they don't have to worry about overtime. So mailing of that disconnection notice versus the door hangers. We did want to let you know at administration time that it takes to reconcile the list before we can make it available to the water department for so that they know who they're placing these door hangers for. We do spend a considerable amount of time. There are a couple reports that we need to run, and this, of course, is after we have balanced all of our cash. And that way we know that we've posted payments correctly to customers' accounts, and we're able to reconcile that. After that is done, we have to run 2 reports, both of which are going to reconcile against each other, because of course we want to make sure that whoever that is on our door hanger list or disconnection list truly and correctly is on that list. So we definitely want to audit that, and we take the time to do that. Also, for our Public Works department, when we're done with this list, we try to make it as efficient for them as possible. So we put our addresses in quadrant northwest, northeast. We do that as well, and that takes some time because that's manually done. This program does not do this for us. So we try to do this to maintain efficiency for them. Eden is really good at trying to help us figure out different ways to come up with reporting that'll make things a lot more quicker and efficient. But we do find that we're told that's just not possible, and we've got to open up information into Excel and then manually make our own reporting to get that work done. So that's why it does take us till about 10:30, and if we're lucky and our cashiering system is doing fine and we don't have any hiccups, then usually we can get that list out to about 9:30. But again, we just want to make sure that everything is accounted for, and that we've got a report that works efficiently for Public Works. So my next slide As regarding late fees versus that disconnection fee, I think the question was raised about maybe looking at the late penalties themselves. I did find City of Anacortes does not charge a late penalty. They do charge that disconnection of $75. So if it gets to that point and they're disconnecting, or it's going to be a $75 fee. Port Townsend charges 1.5% of the past due balance and a reconnection fee, either 20 to 75. The difference in that is if it's within city limits or out of city limits. Outside of city limits, that's the difference there. Bellingham, 1.5% of the past due balance. They do have a disconnection reconnection fee, they call it. It's $50. Marysville, 5% of the past due balance. That disconnection's 20, plus another 5% of the balance if they get to the disconnection. Everett does not charge a late penalty, but charges a disconnection fee of $34 or $42. Again, that's if you're within or outside of city limits, and a reactivation fee of $34. Linwood, it's a flat $8 for residential. Commercial is 10% with a disconnection fee of $50. Vancouver, 10% of the past due balance, $40 on the reconnection. Edmonds, $25 on the late fee, $40 to reconnect, and $125 if it's an after-hours reconnection. And our after-hours right now is $75. Snohomish does $20 for a late penalty and $50 for the disconnection fee. So in comparison to us, we charge the $15 flat plus the 0.67%. It's about $15 to $17 a month, and then a $10 disconnection fee. So we probably should look at raising that, or whomever the powers that be. So I do, in my handout that I gave you, I wanted to just compare City of Anacortes.
Show them which one you're looking at.
Oh,
I got it, this one.
sorry. So it should have UB billing, City of Anacortes, number of days to disconnect, and then the City of Oak Harbor column. We looked at June, July, and August. Now, their read cycle is when, of course, they're reading their meters. So the June's bill, the read cycle was May 1st to May 31st. And if you look at our column, particularly, it was May 2nd to June 1st. The start of their billing cycle is May 1st. Start of our billing cycle was May 21st. So I'll try to explain this without complicating it. But our bill, at the close of the billing cycle, as you see there for Anacortes is May 31st, and then our is June 20th. So our June 20th bill is for water consumption in the month of May, which we don't have that final read until June 1st. So from May 2nd to June 1st, we've got our water consumption. It is then billed on the 20th. Whereas with Anacortes, they actually close that cycle on the 31st, and their bill date is June 7th, our bill date, June 20th. The numbers to the right, indicating the days to disconnect, are just so you can see the days as they compare. And even with the due dates being different between City of Anacortes and us, they're still relatively the same dates from the due date to the disconnection, 27 days for June. They don't have the late penalty, but you see on our column there, we did issue a late penalty on July 19th. Door hangers, they do physically post them. Theirs came out on July 19th and July 22nd. Ours came July 30th, 31st. Disconnection for Anacortes was July 24th, and ours came at August 14th. But do take notice that there is a difference in the close of their billing cycle compared to ours. And then the same pattern for July and August. So I think there was a question about the amount of time from due date to disconnection, and they are about the same. Actually the same. Okay, so our next one is waiving fees, late penalty. Our current practice right now is we allow one per customer per account. So we can look at different options, of course, if you see fit. Look at every year, 2 years, 3 years. Right now, it's one late penalty waived per customer per account. And usually you see that the statement is made for the life of the account. Well, that's, you know, when you close your account and you open a new one, then it starts all over for you because it's a new account. Owner account versus tenant account. Some information for you regarding why we think owner account would be a lot better than having also a tenant account. But there's more accountability to the owner as they remain the account holder as long as they own the property. The water is not shut off or turned back on due to change of occupants, so we won't be, you know, making that call out or doing the service orders to Public Works to get to the property to turn that meter on or off. Per other cities' data, they find there's less door hanger notifications and delinquent bills because owners are taking care of that versus the tenant. Owners receive an owner copy of the tenant bill. Talked about that earlier. For each tenant account, and that is a regular and the late notices. I did want to add in that that is in compliance with a certain RCW. I don't have it in the slide, but it is compliant with RCW 5708. And cities that open owner accounts only, I wanted to get that documented for you, Anacortes, Everett, and it's only commercial tenants that they'll open a tenant account for. Port Townsend is owner accounts, Vancouver and Edmonds. So this next one, I'm kind of excited about. I'm hoping we can give it a lot of consideration, but Masters Touch is currently our third-party printing company, so we already have a contract with them. They mail out our bills to the customers. They do provide an e-notice feature. And just real quickly, the customer would be, receive a setup code provided on their bill, their mailed bill. They would sign up with their email address. They would receive an email to activate, click to validate, and once validated, they would no longer receive the paper bill, but can preview or print the bill because it's coming to them now via email as a PDF. They can link multiple accounts of the same account holder. The e-notice email would include an active pay button. This is one I'm excited about. If they get the email, they get the PDF of the bill, they see the amount of the bill, there will be an active pay button in that email. Then it links back to our payment portal. They'll have the bill in hand. They can add in the account number. They can add in the amount that they need to, which a lot of our customers are asking, please make this electronic somehow. E-notices also can provide the late penalty notice via email. And per the company, Masters Touch, they say most locations receive about 15% of their customers registering, and Island County currently uses the same platform. So we're pretty excited. They gave me a great slide show here, but I put it up there. It was going to be a lot of information for you. Did we want to talk about the affordability? No? Okay. Okay. So kind of give you an idea of the cost. Just another thing I'm excited about. There's a one-time setup fee of $300. There is 12 cents per statement registered, a penny per PDF uploaded, and e-notices insert to advertise the sign up, they would charge us
0.015 cents.
Yeah, so it's pretty affordable, and we could really get this in place for our customers. I think this is a great start. They would have something electronic. This is great for people that are on deployment or just, you know, they're not here for the winter. They're somewhere else warm, but they want to have this information available to them right away. And I'm really excited. I hope we can look at that.
Budget-wise, it's significantly less than adding the e module for utility billing. So as far as cost goes, this is a way more affordable option to get us our feet wet.
Yes. So my next slide, we're just asking, you know, we've got in mind some recommended hours, 8 to 4. This is for the utility billing staff, 8 to 4. Open to the public, lobby open to the public. For closing our cash registers, reconciling, generating the reports are required for public work staff. And that full hour ensures us enough time to correct any errors. Right now I can tell you This is how it works for us. I have 3 cashiers. I have 1 cashier that closes at 4 p.m. in the evening so that she can be the opening cashier the next morning. So that 4 to 5 hour, they're balancing. They're still at their desks. The customers come in, and a lot of times we have to say, I'm sorry, you've got to wait for the available cashier that's open, because they've got to balance to be able to be open the next day. And so now that cashier that is open till 5, the next morning, she is going to be balancing from 8 to 9. Again, not available to the public because she's balancing, which means she's counting her cash, getting her reports to reconcile, and that process is about an hour. So from 4 to 5 or 8 to 9, I'm not firing on all cylinders with all possible cashiers. If I could have the lobby closed at 4, then I've got all cashiers available at 8 a.m., all cashiers available throughout the day till close. We take that 4 to 5 p.m. hour, and we are balancing, and we are completing the work for that day, ready for the next morning. I think that is going to really help us out as far as being available to the public. We've got our great remodel. We've got people, giving us great feedback. But it still is a little bothersome when we've got a little line out, and we've got people with cash that want to pay with cash, and I've got 1 cashier. If I've got somebody on vacation or sick, I've got 1 cashier available in that last hour for cash because she's got to be able to give that receipt. And believe it or not, we have a lot of customers that come in that last hour or that first hour, and they're paying with cash. So of course we've got the 8 to 4:30, but I would really like the 4. That would give us that time that we need so that we can serve the public for that entire period of time and make really good use of our time. We're going to save overtime for Public Works again because if we close at 4, we are going to make our last request for reads at 4, and they have until 4:30 to complete that, and then they're not running into overtime. Again, that's going to allow us to close the cash register. It's also making us, as I stated, available for the customers, and it's safer for us because we do reconcile at our desk. We are safe, with the new design, but the lobby's closed, and we can all actually close our tills. All right. Hours of operation, potential change. For Public Works, okay. End of day water account reads and turn on or offs are called out till 5 currently, and that results in that overtime for the staff. In 2017, there were 5 hours overtime, and in 2019, currently 8 hours overtime. So from Public Works, the Solutions water staff already shifts their hours to accommodate our 8 to 5 business hours. Utility office processes service requests up to 5. We absolutely do. Closing and opening accounts for customers, and those reads are essential to our billing process to bill the water consumption. And again, if we can close our office at 4, we better align with their hours, alleviate those overtime needs. Yeah. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Yes, you probably know that I've voiced a couple times some issues, and I only know because it's happened to me, and so I'm sure it's happened to others too.
Yes.
Being property owners with tenants, did you happen to ask Anacortes, so if they do shut off somebody's water, which I'm understanding is sort of the same number of days, to disconnect it, but what do you have to pay to get it back turned on? Did you ask Anacortes that?
For them, no, I didn't ask that amount.
I think you have to pay like up until that day, like you have to pay everything due. But for us, I think where it can cause a backlog is they only have to pay their past due amount. They don't have to pay like the current amount. So they could get their water turned back on, turn around to the same thing, and then you could end up with multiple months.
Yes. Yeah.
In arrears. And to me, that is maybe what I'd like to see, that part of us follow more like Anacortes. I know that might be harder for people, but you know, I mean, I don't know what everybody else thinks, but that is sort of where I see a problem with people getting in real trouble, because it's not just 1 month. You could rack up a lot of money, like multiple months. So that's the part maybe that I would like to follow, like what an Anacortes does. That's the one piece. You know, as far as putting it in owners' names, you know, we are the owners. We're ultimately responsible anyways. I mean, even if it isn't a tenant name, so I don't, you know, so would that mean that in rental property situations where there are tenants that the bill would just go only to the owner and just the owner would have to pay it in their name every month?
Or the property manager.
For property management, or even just individual owners of properties with tenants. So it would just not go, it wouldn't go to the address, the physical address of the water, it would go only to the owner address.
We could do the courtesy billing, as some of the cities do, but the actual name on the utility billing account is the name of the owner.
And so the owner has to pay it, like they're, like the tenant, you know, wouldn't pay it. So that, to me, I mean, I'm gonna put this out there, that's gonna cause a little bit more burden on the owners. You know, that could be a situation, and like I said, the owners are ultimately responsible anyway, so that part of it doesn't change, but what's gonna change now is a little more time for property managers, for owners, and time is money. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was reflected in increased rents. So I just want to put that out there, that may be an effect of doing that, which, you know, so be it, but I just want to make sure that everybody knows that I could see that very much happening. So those are my thoughts on those couple things.
Okay.
Councilor Servatius.
Thank you. Well, I'm surprisingly excited about this topic, as much information as it was. It's very timely. I made the mistake of going on Facebook last night. It's a nice lengthy thread, and you guys are the hot topic. So,
Really?
Thanks, Patricia.
what's interesting about it, though, a couple things that came out of this was, and I just want to reiterate this, our fees are low, not necessarily our fees for water, sewer, garbage, but our fees for late fee, connection, disconnect, all that are low. And so I think we want to be proactive to keep that in line with our peers to make sure that obviously life circumstances happen. I've been late. I've actually had to go in there and grovel, and I got my one dispensation, and that was it. So we do need to keep people accountable. What was amazing in the thread I read was the amount of people that did not, you know, there was always morph into a discussion one way or the other, but the amount of people that got excited about being able to have the auto pay. So if anyone's watching this, please tell your neighbor, you come in, avoid a check, fill out a form, you can do auto pay. All of that being said, I've been very excited about always pushing technology, and I remember one of the early discussions, it might have been with Doug before you, Patricia, I was amazed at the amount of door hangers. And so when you listed a number here, you said the man-hour cost was $2.14 per door hanger. Help me understand that number.
I'll turn that over to Rich. They did some math because they keep track of all that stuff.
2.14.
Yeah, it was on
It said the man-hours per door hanger. I think it was a
hanger.
cost. I'm guessing it was $2.14.
Let's see which one.
So you guys sprinting from door to door, 416 doors.
You have to, sometimes, well, yeah, we're traveling all over. We have 4 employees that go out, all the utilities, solid waste will go out, just to get this done in a timely manner. We send out 4 employees minimum out to do this. When they come in around 10, we send them all out. Sometimes though, a lot of these door hangers could be in an apartment complex that might have 15 units. There's a person there that can put in 15 door hangers really fast, you know, doing that. That's one, but it is going to every door. We do move. We don't talk. We get it on the door and we move on.
I think approximately how many utility bills?
You have
Well,
it there, 416,
yeah.
I think.
No, I'm sorry. So I was just playing with math. They said we had 6,000 utility accounts. 416 is 7% a month are getting a door hanger. So we have man hours, we have vehicles running around the city, wear and tear, liability if there's an accident.
Hours of
Yes.
utilities,
It's
creating that
unbelievable.
spreadsheet.
It's time to get this thing in the 21st century. So I can't support it enough, whether it's the, I forget the name of the master, what'd you call it?
Master's touch.
Master's Touch, or I know when we originally talked about an Eden module, it
Right.
was very expensive.
Yep, and this is way more reasonably priced.
And even being more expensive could still possibly make sense when you look at all the, once again, everything I just named. I want to just hit on a couple of the other things you asked about. Hours of operation, I get that, but I also understand if most people get off work at 4:30, they're going to sprint over here.
They do.
Chaz you guys looked at the number of people coming in, and you came up with an average win.
Oh, yeah. I wish I brought that information, but in our Tyler cashiering program, it'll give me hours of volume of business that's transacted. And yes, as soon as we have a payment, we're processing it. So I can be able to depend on this, but the later part of the day, 4 to 5, it is not as busy as it is 8 to about lunchtime.
Super.
Yes, so for us, if you do approve and allow us to close at 4, there's not going to be, I don't believe, a big impact on our customers. And of course, before we make that change, we'll give plenty of advance notice to our customers.
Absolutely.
And that auto pay, I did want to interject a little. The auto pay form is available on our website. It's under our utility billing department on the website. It's definitely there. But I'm glad people are excited about signing up because it's great. You still get the bill and the bill's paid on time.
Okay, super. So that was the question, is when do we see the bolus of people coming through? If it's more in the morning, then that may not have as much of an effect.
Mm-hmm.
The other thought was, it just becomes a policy that if you want to turn on a new account, it has to be done maybe by 3, so that you have plenty of time to call it to Public Works, and we still stay open to 4:30, but our policy is no new accounts. Oh, it's like the bank, right? They turn the window over at 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
We're on the next business day, so no new, that's something to possibly consider, is no new accounts are opened after 3 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Accounts in the owner's names, I too have tenants, so I can go either way with that. In the end, we're eventually responsible. I've had to have talks with my tenants, would you please water the landscaping once in a while, because they think that, the water is so expensive, they don't want to use it.
Yeah.
So then the flip side of that coin would be, if it's always just totally shifts to the owner, then the slip and slide and sprinklers are turned on 24/7, and there's no accountability there. So I don't know that I'm ready to sign up for that. Just seeing if there's any other notes I made. I appreciate you guys putting the efforts into this. I'm very excited to make progress in this area. I think it's good for the city. And I think it'll be good for the public too, to have more technology available for them, to be able to look up the bill online. Thanks.
Councilor Humber.
I'll have a different point of view than Joel had regarding the billing. I think most of the tenants who we're dealing with here, you're dealing with apartment, multifamily tenants, and you have one meter per building. I've never put in 15 meters if there's 15 units. It just doesn't work that
Right.
way. It's not
No.
economical. As a property owner with tenants, I preferred to have the bill. That way I know it was paid all the time. It was worked into the lease or the rental agreement, including any increases that would come up from year to year. It would be defined as these are utility increases, etc.
Right.
The downside to the tenant or the property owner is if the tenant doesn't pay, that becomes an encumbrance against the property at some point that may affect the credit of the property owner. Then the city gets billed right away with the owner, and you're not dealing with a variety of issues. And I'm sure there's landlords who had people move out in the middle of the night. I can tell you some horror stories on that, but we'll save that for another time. And so I support the concept of going to the property owner of record with the billing, and certainly understand and sympathize with the need to have a closeout period at the end of the day so we can efficiently close out the accounts.
Thank you.
Councilor Wilson.
Couple things. Great presentation, Chaz. A lot of information. First off, when it comes to the $15 late fee, you're hearing from the constituents out there, I think, I would tend to want to go after the heavy hitters, the folks that have got a true past due balance, not the person who miswrote the check for $8 and blew it and now has a $15 late fee. I would really like to see that change, to shift. And I know it's a master fee schedule thing, but I'd like to see that shift so that those people who have a small balance get a small late fee, and those people who have a larger balance are paying a substantially higher late fee.
Okay.
Also, I feel the same way about the disconnects. 85 days in, right? If they're going to be getting a disconnect, we need to make sure it's commensurate to our costs and our efforts involved in that. So I don't mind looking at those fees and making sure they're commensurate with the amount of time and effort it takes and all that. When it comes to the hours, my general thought is I'm very skeptical about reducing services, right? I mean, because that's really what we're talking about doing. Now, I can see a road to that, a path to that, and the path to that is like a lot of companies have done, is with the electronic. I see that as being huge. I'm actually almost as excited about it as Joel is. Just the fact to be able to sit down, pay those bills online, be able to get the email, and I think also as a property owner, being able to get that email with the tenant's notice and be able to manage that online is a big plus. I think the rates are fantastic. Obviously, it's a lot less money than printing up an envelope, mailing it out. So I'm really excited about that. I think if we were to get enough people signed up on that, in other words, if we really were to put some effort into that, let's face it, it's a cost savings for the city,
Yes.
long term.
Yeah.
So it's something that by putting a little bit of effort and a little bit of money into it up front, we can have a long-term savings on the back side. And then we could probably then look at, where, we could possibly reduce hours because we'd have less people needing the services of the lobby with more people doing that stuff online. So I kind of look at that as a pathway. Maybe there's a way we can get there, right?
Okay.
And certainly in the meantime, I agree with Joel that there can be a cutoff. Hey, we can't establish a new account until the morning. I think that's a reasonable expectation. In the rally, as we look at it right now, we're 8 hours overtime for the month. I don't look at that so much as I look at it as a cost of doing business. I do look at, however, the disruption it makes to our staff. I'm planning to work overtime, so overtime. We should control that as much as we can to just be for the benefit of our staff. So that's my stuff there. When it comes to the tenant billing, I'm a landlord also, so I'm gonna put that out there. If the billing came to me as a landlord of single family, not apartments, unfortunately, I would have to calculate probably the worst case scenario for each tenant's water use and have to adjust the rent accordingly based upon what I felt the exposure could be for a given month. I've got one tenant right now, seems, their water bill's running $200, $210 a month. Apparently they take a whole lot of showers. Obviously I would have to base my rents upon something like that, and I think unfortunately that would unfairly impact the tenants that don't use that kind of water, and obviously also possibly lead to a lot of water usage. I don't know that that's a conservation measure when we're not physically responsible for the amount of water we use or have any sort of ramifications against that, other than maybe some sort of protection in our lease to be able to go back. Again, I think I agree with Councilor Wassinger that it is probably going to result in actually raising rents and making housing a little less affordable. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll make this quick. I'm gonna run down the list. A lot of yeses, one no. Eliminating door hangers, great idea. It's not cost effective. It's not the best way of doing business. Where you're looking at automating, which also, again, automating bills, the master's touch, I can support that. Supporting earlier window hours, as long as that goes hand in hand with developing and implementing the electronic payment measures. I think that we can't put the cart before the horse, so once we have some of those electronic automations up and running, then I can support the earlier window hours. Increased fees to bring us in line with other municipalities. Yeah, we are behind the power curve on there, and I think we ought to catch up. I've also been a tenant and more recently a landlord, and I don't think that the owner billing does anybody any good. Tenants, because I do believe their rents will go up. Landlords, because now you're doing a whole lot of math, and conservation wise, by my day job, I'm an environmentalist. I can't support anything that is going to very possibly increase people's water usage. So that's where I am on all of those short and skinny. Thank you.
Yes,
One
Councilor
quick question.
Surveyor.
on the door. So is that $40 per hour per, you said there's 4 people going out?
It's $40 per hour.
Per individual that's out hanging doors?
Yeah.
That's with Branch, probably.
So, that's a lot of money. I mean,
A lot of time, too.
it's a lot of money and a lot of time, and those folks could probably be put to better use with all the other needs we have in the city, so.
We'll
I'm-
explore the billing directly to the occupant. That would be the quickest and easiest way to make sure that they're getting it at the building where the door, that's the whole goal of the door hangers. So if we can get that set up, then sounds good.
And then so with the, sorry, Mayor, with the Master's Touch, is that the name of it? Does that switch to all electronic billing, the owner, the landlord, I'm sorry, the owner, the tenant, and then you said something about a service address versus a mailing address?
So on the billing for Master's Touch, and I'll let Chaz fill in more, it's an option that'll come on a bill once we agree to it with Master's Touch and set it up. And then you, as the owner, the tenant, you can go in and use that code on all of your billings, and you can have one email address that has multiple accounts. So if you're an owner of multiple houses, then you can have every one of those via PDF that's emailed to you. But you have to agree to it, and you have to sign up. So it doesn't automatically electronically send it to anybody. It's in the hands of the people that are receiving the bill.
And do we in-house stuff these envelopes, these bills?
Nope. These
It's
are
a service.
It's all done by Master's Touch.
No, I mean right now.
Right now, Master's Touch.
No, we don't stuff any bills.
Right
We
now.
send a report to
Okay.
Master's Touch, and then they generate the PDF, the bill, and
Right now, because I get, as we all do, if you have a tenant, you get a copy. Who's
Yeah.
filling all those envelopes?
Master's Touch.
Okay. Thanks.
And it'll be cheaper for them to do it PDF once you sign up.
Councilor Weasley.
And just a quick add, I like the fact that we can add additional promotional pages. Imagine being able to connect with our citizens that way. Right now, it costs us a ton of money to stuff an additional page in the utility bill. We'll be able to send out an additional informational page to anybody who's on that electronic billing for what, a penny?
0.015, so less than 2 pennies.
Yeah.
And I do have one final clarifying question before we get out of your hair. So the late fees, I didn't really hear any options from you guys. Are you thinking while we're sorting this out, instead of it being waived once in a lifetime, are we thinking waive it annually, every other year, every third year?
Why don't you bring us 3 options?
We will. Okay.
Quick comment. Contrary to what I said earlier about mailing to the property owners of record, quite frankly, I really don't care if it goes to 10 to the property owner, because the property owner has the choice to come in and open up the account if they want to protect any lien against the property. So I don't really care one way or the
Yeah,
other.
and there are owners that do that.
Yeah.
The tenant doesn't come in, the owner is paying the bill. The owner is contacting us for any questions.
And I think in most cases where you focus on a individual private residence, single residence, where there's one meter, it's a rental, and it doesn't get paid, and then that means the property owner has to deal with his own tenant. So
Right. I did want to add, because you guys talked about the cutoff time, like make the cutoff time 3. So what we run into, I'll just let you know what we run into is we do have tenants that get the keys, get possession of the home that night, And if we're telling them, sorry, we can't, start your services because you've come in after 3, they're already in the home, they're using water that is still under the name of whomever it may have been, the owner. If there's some sort of situation that happens in the home, there's a leak of some sort, it's not going to be that tenant's or new owner's responsibility to pay it, really, in our eyes, because we're not doing a read and capturing that consumption. So that's one thing we run into. When we say 8, we're still open till 5, but we're stopping this particular service at 3. I know we're gonna get complaints from tenants and probably property managers because the billing it's not gonna be correct. Because it really is, when we read the meter, that's when we bill up to that point, that day. So we have to keep that in mind too. Which is why I push for the 4 o'clock, because our office is open till 4, reads are done up until 4, water department has till 4:30 to complete it, and they're still within their regular time frame.
Can you have a special customized rate for emergency billing reading? And
Well, we
and
have
give the owner or the tenant that option?
We do have a $75, and if I guess that would be a question for Rich or Kathy, so when would the $75 after hours fee commence? Would it be that 3 o'clock or the time when we've closed our utility billing office? Because we're really an extension of the water department as far as customer service, because we're open, they're calling us, turn it on, turn it off. We're scheduling that, and then we put it on what we call Google Sheets. It's real-time information shared with the water department. We put that request on, and we actually have an agreement. If it's after 4:30, we're calling the staff and saying, hey, we've got something for you to do. And it could be 4:55 and we're open, and someone comes in and they will open an account, and it takes 10 to 15 minutes to do that and go over all of the information that we want to go over with them, service expectations and things like that. We want to take that time, because then it sets them up for success, with utilities with the city, so it's important.
Okay, I think we've got some more things to think about, so.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
So, Chad,
So we will move on to legal department. Item number 8, private smoking facilities regulations. So we have our city attorney, Nikki Esparzo, joining us.
Thank you, Mayor. City Council. So this evening's conversation is about private smoking facilities. And first off, I'll acknowledge that I've seen a copy of Mr. Booth's emails, and staff's perspective is quite different. However, staff's interactions with Mr. Booth and with one other individual did cause us to take a harder look at private smoking facilities with an eye towards identifying a path forward for these types of clubs. So obviously you all know that the RCW and our municipal code prohibit smoking in places that are open to the public and places of employment. So there are situations where there are truly private clubs. Oftentimes these are operating more in Seattle, King County, Tacoma, and so Seattle, Tacoma, King County, Pierce County, they are much more on top of the regulations for these private clubs. And the majority of the time, they are overseen by the health departments. So I had a conversation with an individual at the King County Health Department, a very long conversation about private smoking facilities. And what they have found is that they need to keep a very close eye on these clubs, because oftentimes they do operate in a manner that isn't truly private. So the bottom line is we can't prohibit a private smoking facility if it does not have any employees or volunteers or other people that operate under the direction of the owner, right? So the definition of employees is actually pretty broad, and that's actually where a lot of these clubs fail. We also, the other requirement is that it's truly closed to the public. So we can't prohibit them, but we can certainly ensure that they are operating in a manner that is truly a private club. And it's very important to do so. So the regulations in King County are quite strict. There are guidelines for operations that are absolutely subject to inspections. One of the requirements is that these clubs have to have secured entrances. They can't be obvious and open to the public. There is restrictions on exterior signage. You can't have any visible signs. There can be no secondhand smoke drifting into protected areas, areas that are open to the public or that have employees. There's written membership criteria, and that criteria has to be restricted to the legal smoking age, which is going up January 1st to 21 years old. Has to be limited in that there can only be a specific number of club members. King County's number is actually 2,500, which of course they're an urban area, so they have a lot more of these clubs, and the number seems fairly high to me. But and the membership also has to be selective. There's criteria for how the members are selected. The clubs have to follow a membership process. There's an application requirement. There's initiation and membership dues required, and you can't just say, well, it's an annual $5 cover fee and you're good. So you have to keep records of your membership and how you got your members and all the applications and the like. So there's also a very limited guest policy. The Liquor Control Board has similar policies when it comes to private clubs and the consumption of alcohol. I think it's 6 guests per year or something to that effect. But King County Health Department has much tighter regulations on the way that guests can enter the private smoking facilities. And like I said, there's mandatory record keeping, which is also open to inspection. So one of the things that when I started thinking about this more, that I came across is some cities, say in California, are restricting the locations of these clubs, like 1,000 feet from a school. However, in California, the smoking restrictions aren't quite as stringent as they are here. And so I don't know that that's necessary given the way that these clubs are required to operate. They are required to be truly public in order to, or private in order to be legal. They cannot be open to the public. So I'm not sure that we need to put in place any sort of restrictions on location necessarily. My thought was that perhaps we add a brief section to our smoking and vaping codes under 645 and 646 that essentially say that private smoking facilities will be in compliance with the city's adopted policies and procedures, or Island County Health Department's policies should it adopt guidelines or regulations. I had a conversation with somebody at Island County, and it doesn't look as though there's been the same kind of interest that we've seen in the last couple of months here in these private clubs, and so Island County doesn't seem to have caught up with this one yet. They very well may sometime in the near future, and if that's the case, then it makes sense to me to transfer that responsibility to Island County Health Department. But in the meantime, I do believe that it is important to put in place some guidelines so that there is a path forward for these private smoking facilities. So with that, I will take any questions that you have. I think the intent would be to make minor code changes that put in place a reference to some policies or guidelines that we need to be able to reference in order to regulate.
Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you. Ricky, so currently under the current regulations, and let me make sure I have this straight, the regulations we're looking at putting in place are to facilitate such a creation of such a place where our current code does not allow it at all, or are we looking to tighten up our current code to give us the ability to regulate? So
clubs that are open to the public cannot legally operate, which is something that we ran into with the Jazzy's Hookah Club. And this is a way of putting everyone on notice that these are the requirements that you have to comply with in order to make sure that this is legal. Because it just isn't legal to operate a public hookah lounge.
And currently, right now, we have no private
We don't have guidelines in place.
Guidelines in place.
That say
So-
this is how you do this and do it legally.
So under the current regulations, there's not a place legally in the city of Oak Harbor in which such a place could exist. Now, there had been some out in the county at one time, is that correct?
I don't know about anything out in the county. My conversation with county just suggested that there aren't the guidelines in place that say this is how you do this legally.
So private places can operate in the city. But if we're going to have to, since we have to allow them, it's better for us to regulate them.
Well, they have to be
better
truly private,
guidelines.
and this is
Yeah,
how you
better
make them
guidelines.
truly private.
Provides us better guidelines on policing them.
And do we have currently any guidelines at all, or? So we're creating the guidelines in order to create a category which is a private club.
Private clubs are legal, but they have to be truly private, and this is the guidelines for how you make it truly private.
Councilor Larson?
Thank you, Mayor. So, obviously, we've been looking at this quite in depth.
Yes.
I guess my question is there a municipality, a county, or somewhere that has adopted a private club code that you would recommend, or is there a hybridization of a few of them that you think you could turn into some kind of conglomerate that you would recommend that we adopt?
I would actually not recommend that we put the guidelines in code. I would say we reference them, don't put them in code. There isn't.
What was this, what was,
I asked the question, is there an example out there she would follow?
So Seattle King County's, their policies, they are written policies, but they are not in code. So what's in code is that smoking in public places is illegal. This has come from the loophole where it is not illegal in private places or places that do not have employees.
But currently, there is nothing that we have as a city that says this is what one must do to be a private club that would allow that.
Because how do you define what is truly private?
Well, that's my question, I guess, is how do we move forward in order to be able to do that?
So my recommendation is that we put something in code that references the guidelines, and we will provide you with those guidelines, those written guidelines, and put in place something that says, as promulgated by this department or that department, whichever department we think it's most appropriately landing in. But again, have in place something that says if Island County adopts policies, then we will defer to Island County, because really it is the health departments that are taking the lead on these.
So if Island County takes no action, is your recommendation that we also take no action?
No, it is not my recommendation that we take no action. It's my recommendation that we essentially mirror what they're doing in King and Pierce County, what their health departments are doing, and put in place guidelines that say this is how you make this truly private. And the guidelines would be written policies and guidelines, as opposed to being codified.
And I guess going back to my original question, the guidelines that they have in place, would you recommend those?
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. But they are not codified. They are written guidelines and policies, but they're not in the Seattle Municipal Code.
Councilor Sudivs?
Thank you, Mayor. So this is one of those, obviously trying to be proactive. I don't see it being, I don't want to say it's not going to be a huge hit or popular. If somebody wants to smoke a cigar or whatever in there, right? I mean, it's like sitting at home in your living room. But I'm guessing this just gives a group of individuals an established place to do it. You made the statement earlier that it's currently illegal to operate, if I'm paraphrasing this, currently illegal to operate a public hookah lounge?
Yes.
We had one.
So we had
Or a hookah lounge that utilizes tobacco.
in 2013, and my understanding of that one is that it was steam-based as opposed to smoke-based, and that it was before the vaping regulations.
And that was my understanding. So now is there more? I know the vaping thing has caught a lot of attention recently. Are there vaping regulations that would prevent a steam-based hookah
So-
lounge right now?
There are actually alternatives to the charcoal-based smoke, which is the traditional hookah, right? And it's steamed stones that they use. However, that arguably would violate the vaping laws because it does still contain the nicotine. And my understanding from talking with King County Health Department is that the clientele does not like the steam stones, and so these private clubs or these clubs that have been authorized to utilize that have just gone back to the charcoal-based hookah.
Okay. So coming back to, I guess, Mr. Larson's comment is how do we define, I mean, I don't want to get in the business of monitoring somebody's annual dues and give me a report of how much you charge. That's not our job. Our job is public safety, so we don't want people wandering back and forth from the nearest drinking establishment, just wandering in and out. Although they could do that if it's private, but somehow I think that could open the door to just people wandering in and out.
That's a part of why it's so important to keep it truly private, right? No
Right.
signage, enclosed entrances, no advertising.
And obviously recourse for the neighbors if there's smoke that penetrates the walls or the ceiling or the into the next establishment. I don't know.
Well, that's the other thing that I had attempted to look into is, you know, the International Building Code addresses ventilation issues because actually hookah smoking generates a lot more carbon monoxide than other types of smoke. So, but the IBC addresses the ventilation issues, internal ventilation, but there isn't anything that addresses external ventilation. And so I had attempted to contact the Clean Air Agency and I did not get a call back. So it's still something I can look into.
Councilman Hollander, any question?
Just one question. So this is for members only or members and their guests? There are
Members.
14 guests.
No, members only. The Seattle King County policy is quite restrictive. So I think you get like one guest per year and they have to be properly signed in, and it's stricter than, say, Liquor Control Board regulates like the VFW hall and the like. So, and, you know, even though I understand the point that probably we aren't going to be seeing very many of these, it is on the rise in King County. I have a stat sheet if you want to look at it from King County Public Health that talks about hookah smoking, and it is on the rise, especially amongst young people. So it is something that we want to at least be aware of and think about.
Councilor Sabady?
Would this ever morph into something else that we would need to consider? I mean, if I'm not a smoker, but I've had a cigar. So if I'm sitting there, am I now wanting to play poker? And so now we start gambling, and how do we, you know?
So there's regulations that talk about gambling in private clubs as well. That's regulated differently.
Right. All right.
So, moving forward, I will work on drafting some policies, or actually stealing from King County and Pierce County and compiling them into policies that work for us. Probably not quite as high a membership number. 2,500 to me seems high for a rural area, but we can certainly talk about that further. And move towards adding a little blip in our code that talks about compliance with policies.
Councilor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor. I can support that. I'd like to see us get out ahead of this. As you said, it is becoming more prevalent. It may get more popular where you might see more inquiries about this. So I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. My suggestion would be look at the policies that are out there, bring us together some kind of hybridized version and how we think we ought to reference that in code, and let's move forward that way.
Absolutely.
Councilor Wilson?
Yeah, and a similar sentiment here. You know, people are going to do what people do, right? And this is either going to be done behind the scenes and underboarded, or it's going to be done right and above. You know, I'd like to see us have a pathway to be able to do it right and regulate it right, but make sure that we do have a pathway for people to be able to do this, because if we close the door altogether, it's just going to happen, and it's going to happen unregulated, and that doesn't make any sense. So let's make sure we have a path, please.
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we'll go to the next item, follow up on conflict in defense services.
So when we came to you, I believe it was in April, to discuss the fact that our one conflict public defender's contract was about to expire, we talked about what we thought was an appropriate rate of compensation to offer. And at the time, council authorized us to go out at $75 an hour. We have had that RFQ out everywhere. We've had it on all of the defense websites. We've had it on the Bar Association website. We've had the Allen County Bar Association push it out multiple times in email form, and we haven't gotten any responses. So the options at this point are seek authorization to increase the amount that we're offering from $75 to $85, or we can allow the judge to appoint from the bench and set a compensation rate that he feels is appropriate. At this point, staff's recommendation is to go ahead and put it out again at $85 an hour, and I am absolutely willing to hear any input you have on that. And I am handling this just from an administrative perspective for Mr. Oborn. I in no way, shape, or form am involved in the selection of public defenders.
Councilor Waters.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, we were paying less than that. We tried to get someone at the $75 an hour rate. I think it's a reasonable graded increase to 85, and to see if we can get someone willing to pick up the RFQ at that. I would be for reissuing the RFQ at 85 per hour.
Right.
Councilor Surveillance.
Can we just downgrade that when the recession hits to 75 again? Might be more people looking for work, so, all right.
That's a fair point. So I'm seeing head nods. All right, we will get that back out at 85.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to Public Works. Item number A is Department of Ecology General Nutrient Removal Permit comments. And we've got our project engineer, Fred Arvidsson, and our Public Works Director, Kathy Rosen, joining us. Welcome.
Well, good evening. This is responding to nutrient standards in the Puget Sound. You might remember back in June we gave you a presentation on nutrient standards in the Puget Sound and what they're doing and what they're coming at us. Well, it's becoming real fast. Should be a pun, yeah. Give you background. You know, we installed our clean water facility and put it in operation in November. So it's been doing an excellent job for us. In December, we received notice from the Department of Ecology about placing limits, warning us it's going to happen for nutrient loads in the Puget Sound. These nutrients are primary nitrogen and ammonia or nitrate forms. This is being driven by the Puget Sound not meeting dissolved oxygen standards, so it's a real problem. There is an environmental lawsuit trying to force these limits in the Puget Sound. DOE is resisting that, but that's still an open issue. A couple weeks ago, the Department of Ecology initiated rulemaking for these nutrient standards, so we were notified that they are starting this process. Our plant performance, like I say, we're talking about ammonia and nitrogen. It's a normal part of our wastewater. Our influence running about 30 to 40 milligrams per liter. Ammonia, we don't have nitrate going in there, but what happens with ammonia, it becomes, through a biological process, becomes nitrate. Right now, our nitrate discharge is running in the 4 to 5 range. Very excellent results. And the proposed standards I've heard are talking about 8, so we're way below that proposed standard with our new facility. So that is good news. Like I say, we would currently meet the proposed nutrient standard. So we're hoping not to have any impact to the city, but we want to be sure about that. And we do feel that we should be proactive in ensuring that additional limits are not imposed on our facility. These will be very expensive. We're talking about $1 billion being spent in the Puget Sound area in the next 10 years on these standards. So the rulemaking process is basically a two-step process. We definitely want to participate in that process and make sure our interests are met. They will implement the standards through the permit process, which involves public participation and testimony during the process. We do have, of course, both as a general public and as a permit holder, the opportunity to provide comment, and we definitely want to do that. The first step is kind of simplistic, but it involves selecting the type of permit to use. We have two types of permits that they have available for them. One is a facility-specific permit. Our clean water facility operates under one of those right now. And there's a general permit process, which is sort of a blanket permit they hand out to everybody.
Like our stormwater permit.
Yeah.
That's a general permit.
DOE has indicated in the meetings that they prefer a general permit because it limits negotiations and can be implemented in a shorter period of time, so they can get to every facility in the Puget Sound very quickly rather than negotiating with 50 to 100 of them individually. Oops. Where are we in the process right now is, like I say, they have indicated the first step is to do that. So what they're asking for is guidance on what type of permit to use. So they said they want to use a general permit, but they're asking for public comment on that. Does not discuss what's included in the permit at this point, just the type of permit. The future process will get in more detail on the actual language and requirements coming out of the general permit if they decide to go that direction. And those comments are due October 21st.
Mayor, can I ask a question? No, I'm sorry. You said we're being proactive. Are we providing any comments then as far as?
I will talk about that.
Okay.
Talk a little bit more about general permit. It imposes a uniform standard to all facilities where a specific permit matches the technology and the facility to the ambient water stream. So, like I say, when we do the permit, our existing permit was actually, there's a 20-page write-up on how we impact that. This is just more, everybody's gonna do this. It's convenient from the DOE's perspective because it centralizes the participant comments, puts them all in one hoop. It's more expeditious in implementing the standards. Like I say, they can get to 50 to 100 plants in one fell swoop. And it's more uniform as application from their point of view, which can be an advantage or disadvantage to us. As Cassie said, our stormwater and biosolids programs are under a general permit. It's not new to us. We do it every day. But also, I think a very important point is, and we have to be clear about this, is a general permit can include facility-specific requirements. So a general permit, while it's trying to be uniform, can include appendixes and processes to identify additional. And that's very important to us right now because I think we're an outlier in the process. Our concerns about a general permit are any neutral permit must recognize Oak Harbor's investment and not impose additional standards. We are already performing at where they want to be with everybody, and we want to get recognized for that and not get imposed additional standards. And our worry about a blanket approach is that could happen because we just fall through the cracks. And a big issue with this, which we see this, I think, and there's a lot of comment about this, is nutrient issues are not only facility specific, each plant does it differently, they're also impacted by local conditions. The water quality on the east side of the island, the Saratoga Critical Passage, is different on the west side of the island, right off the beach there. So there's a lot of variation in the sound on nutrient issues, and they're going to say one size fits all. The bureaucratic, and another thing that really worries me a little bit personally is the general permit, the comment, anybody makes comments, and right now there's environmental litigation on this. The environmental litigants are going to be coming in and requesting pretty draconian standards that's already been rejected by the DOE, and they're going to try to push that through. So we do need to be able to argue those issues. Also, I feel the bureaucratic process tends to streamline the input and create a one-size-fits-all scheme, and they may not recognize the good players or the bad players. They're just going to say everybody fits in the same bag. And realistically, I think they're going to go with the general permit. They're heading that direction. You know, it's going to be hard to change them that. But I think we need to be sure that when they go into the second stage of this, that they are addressing individual permit holder situations. So I think in making these comments, we need to make sure that's a point that gets carried on to the next stage. And, you know, why comment on a general permit? No good deed goes unpunished. We are doing a good job. We're ahead of the game. Actually, we're probably going to be quoted as an example of how to do it, because a lot of people are going to be whining about it. But like I say, there's a certain point where they say, well, yeah, you're doing a good job, and we want to be sure that we get that the work we've done in the future recognized. I do think we need to be proactive, because these are going to cost a lot of money, and to avoid future costs. There's a lot of things they can do to us, not from a capital point, but from an operational point, monitoring, a lot of things like that. So we want to avoid future costs, and there's a real potential for growth limitations. I don't see it happening to us, but a lot of facilities in the future are going to get downgraded or down their capacity. They're going to downgrade their capacity by 20 to 30% to make this happen. We want to avoid those kind of situations. Again, it's just being proactive. I'm also concerned is, we talk about King County, Pierce County, there are a lot of big players in this situation, so we're, the small guy, but we're also, like I say, a good example. So we want to make sure our voice gets heard. And I'm also concerned about the environmental litigation. I've been involved with these in the past, and the litigants have a tendency to get more force, more voice, because they have an ongoing suit. So we want to be able to involve those conversations. If we do make comment, that gives us some standing if we ever decide to appeal or want to participate in appeal. I think there's a high likelihood that whatever general permit comes out is going to be appealed by the people in the environmental lawsuits right now. If they doesn't get what they want, they're going to appeal it. Something that happens in the business, it's a very specialized, esoteric process, and sometimes the squeaky wheel can get the grease if you play the game right. Get down to the actual negotiations, and we start dealing on a specific basis. Us having a wide voice sometimes, so we're easy to shut up by just giving us more capacity, and I've done that several times in the past. And also, we have a unique card to play too, in the fact that we are a leader right now, and people are going to be, as people say, this is going to cost my ratepayers a lot of money, and it's impossible to do. They're going to say, well, Carver did it, so we do need to play that card as much as we can also. So the comments on this are pretty simple at this point, but I would suggest we submit comment on the nutrient process, and our comments, I would say, are actually pretty simple at this point. I think we need to comment. One is we are currently providing nutrient control and substantial water quality improvements in the West Whidbey Island receiving waters. That's a specific basin they're looking at. My second comment was we feel a general permit is too generic a process for the complexity of the nutrient issues in Puget Sound. And number three is, we just prefer it be handled in the specific permit process. And if DOE elects to pursue a general permit for nutrient control, then the permit must address each individual treatment plant's contribution to the water quality equitably. We should be treated differently in our lagoon on the other side of the harbor here. And equity in environmentalism is still a very real concern, and we need to do this. Our suggestion on this is staff suggests that the council adopt a resolution incorporating the city comments on the proposed rulemaking. We would prepare a resolution for is it October 17th?
October 15th.
October 15th council meeting. If you choose to adopt it, we would then submit that with a cover by the 21st in the rulemaking process. Questions?
Thank you, Mayor. You said that we are at a level 5. At one time, we were talking about we're at level 4, and that level 8 is the upper end of the threshold that they are considering. How do they determine level?
I'm not level
4 or 5?
We're a level 4 treatment plant is just a function of the mechanical reliability. So.
I think he's talking about what the
Well,
amount of nutrients.
Oh, the amount of nutrients?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
The nutrient measurement.
The nutrition measurements, we are as good as you're going to get with technology today.
So that has not,
And
that makes us a level 4 or 5, or?
it makes us, they don't really classify it by level, but it makes us where they want to go. And
So what is it?
Milligrams per
Our-
liter.
milligrams per liter, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I said level. Yeah.
So the permit limit is going to be 8.
The permit level is going to be 8 in the,
That's the cap.
that's the cap.
Yes, and we're at 4.
We're at 4.
And we're at 4. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
What does that mean in terms of the percentage of the nutrients being
We're-
discharged at level
we're-
4 versus?
We're discharging in the order of total nutrients about 90% in total nitrogen, so we're coming in
9%?
90.
90.
We're removing about 90% of the nitrogen.
We're removing?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's extreme. Getting all nitrate out is, it's actually doing better. I thought we'd do, that's why the 8 level is there. But, so that's an excellent number. And we're also doing phosphorus removal, which is an issue in the litigation, but the DOE is not pursuing it at this point.
So for us and for the staff,
Yeah.
we want to protect our investment with respect to the low level of discharge of
Right.
nutrients compared to most other community systems.
Yeah, my fear is we're doing a good job, and like I say, it's no good deed goes unpunished. That there's, yeah, you're doing a good job, but we're going to treat you like everybody else.
Well, that would be my concern too. And it actually would say that the fastest way for us to bring customers online is to equitably negotiate something with the Navy, because I believe, as I understand from previous conversations, they're going to have similar restrictions on their sewage treatment.
Yes.
Is that correct?
The Navy operates under, not under DOE, but under an EPA,
But
because
EPA,
but
yeah.
EPA and has to, this DOE does what they call 402 certification. So the EPA has to, if there's the state of Washington water quality in Puget Sound, the EPA has to enforce on the Navy, so they would be.
So we as a city, council, administration, staff, we need to be paying close attention to our investment. That's for all of us to understand. And understand the value of what we have when we're negotiating with the Navy, so that our ratepayers aren't subsidizing the Navy.
And that's,
That's what I'm hearing from.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We'll expect a resolution at some stage. We
Yeah,
will expect a
at the
resolution.
October 15th.
Okay, this is the continuation of our last meeting. Yeah, we are bringing back the Enviro Issues Amendments number 2 and 3. That's for the Interpretive Center and Windjammer Park, just to review what we talked about last month. Summary, we've worked with Enviro Issues since 2010. They started with siting of the clean water facility, and they've gone all the way through construction to current areas. Most importantly, they worked on the public involvement for Windjammer Park, starting with the integration plan in 2016, and we're with this all the way through construction. I think they played a central role in keeping our community engaged throughout the process. It's been a long process, 3 years, through charrettes, advisory groups, public meetings, user surveys, and also facilitation. They also led our team during construction as our information availability on the project, construction updates, our website. They managed all that. Our newsletters, we did a lot of materials, signage, and also some events we had going on. And they also, one thing you don't always see is they provided ongoing team support for council updates, our strategic planning, messaging, and media relations. They're quite helpful with all that kind of stuff. You know, we're moving into Windjammer Park Phase 2, and one of our goals is to continue Oak Harbor's successful community-led improvements in Windjammer Park. I think we've had a successful park. I personally have heard, and I'm sure everybody's heard, is a lot of positive comments in that. And I tell people that, you know, was the design team. The design team was led by the community, and every decision we made was facilitated through that process, and our guides were always what the community wanted. So anyway, we're moving forward with 2 areas right now. One is the interpretive center at the clean water facility and Phase 2 of the project, the park, and they kind of go hand in hand with us. We've actually broken this contract now into 2 amendments. One is for the interpretive center, and one is for the Phase 2 of the park. The interpretive center scope of work is facilitating our messaging with our subject matter experts. We have a lot of good people in these areas where we deal with water, stormwater, solid waste, archaeology, wastewater, and we've got a lot of people that are very good at it. One, we have to work out, we only have so much space, we have to work out what is most important that we want to talk about there, and that's going to be important with. The other is helping our people come up with the best public messages that the public can understand. And we really want to get those messages across, and that'll be going hand in hand. Another task they'll be doing this is existing staff, and we have Chuck Lennox as our interpretive center consultant working on this, on graphic concepts. Chuck is a very visual person, but he's not a graphic artist, so we need some support with him on that. And we wanted to go with EnviroIssues because we've had the same look and feel all the way through the project, so we're using their graphics people help with that. We also, you know, as we move through this facility, we want to test it against the public, so we wanted to obtain some public input as we come through with these concepts, so we're not putting some out there that people don't believe in. So that is one amendment. The second amendment would be Windjammer Park Phase 2, and this is more of a kickoff process, more planning. There's a lot of things we have going on. One is we need to revisit the Windjammer integration plan. It's a great plan. It's been a huge tool for us, but we didn't build everything according to plan. You know, we built parts of it and sections of it, and we need to revisit that plan and see where we are, determine a management plan, how we move this thing forward. What's our schedule, how we do this? Some of that is process and talking about it. Another major issue with right now is providing consistency for project team transitions. We've had a design team working for us for 3 years, done a great job for us, but we may or may not proceed with them. So we do need to keep the public messaging and what we dealt with the public and the public process in the core of our moving forward. And if we bring on new team members, they have to be initiated with that. So EnviroIssues will be critical for that. We want to obtain public input. I was meant to say Phase 1. We'd like to get some feedback on, you know, people are liking the facility, but you know, you keep on hearing, well, we should have done this or should have done that, and find out what people like and don't like about Windjammer. I think generally it's a very big success, but now that they've seen it, what are their ideas? We don't want to reinvent the wheel, but it's a good idea to revisit where we've gone and where we want to go. It's in some ways it's a new start, and we do want to engage the community prior to initiating design. We want to get their feeling on that, and we'll use some tools for that. We also want part of it is we have a good vision. The vision of Windjammer Park up to now was connected to the clean water facility. Now, as we move forward with future phases of it, I think the clean water facility becomes secondary or even non-playing in this. But what are we doing with our park? What are we doing with our gateways? I think the South Pioneer Park area, park blocks, there could be downtown. There could be some other issues that may impact how we talk about this in the future. And we have to explore that a little bit. I'm not saying that it is or isn't going to occur, but it's something we do need to understand before we get too far. What I'm trying to avoid is spending a lot of money with design professionals on something that could get changed real quickly. I think our biggest thing is right now is we have a lot of positive feedback on Windjammer Park. We want to maintain that public momentum and interest on future phases of the park. I'm still getting people asking when we're moving ahead with the second phase of the park. And so right now, I think our biggest issue is getting ourselves going again after all this work, getting restarted. But we also have a lot of early next year, we got to start applying for funding packages, budgets, those type of things. So I think there's a lot of work that has to be done before we get to that stage. Anyway, talking about deliverables, in both phases we have meeting facilitation, which doesn't sound like much, but it's actually quite a bit of work. We have a lot of work preparing for meetings and a lot of work following up with meetings. We intend to have a public meeting. We have that in the schedule. We'd like to do another online survey. Those have been really useful to us. We've got a lot of great comments. EnviroIssues does an excellent job of our public comment summaries. Not only do they get the comments down, every sticky pad gets down, we also do a good job of analyzing the information we get and summarizing what we actually heard. Our website is cleanwater.org. It's a website for clean water, and unfortunately I think we're going to have to discontinue that one to start up a new one for phase 2 of the park, and that takes a little work, and takes a little work getting it started. It also takes a little work getting it, keeping it upgraded. Like I said, graphics is a part. We do need help with that, and we do our general signs, newsletters, and other communications tools that they do. Anyway, contract amendment number 1 was approved by council at the last work session. We did extend the contract by 60 days. We're proposing contract number 2 for the interpretive center for amount of $29,125. Contract amendment number 3 would be the Windjammer Phase 2 at $39,605. Both amendments would expire around July 30th, 2020. I don't see us getting some of this public stuff. We're going into the holiday season, so trying to do this type of work between November and Christmas is pretty futile. Questions? And we will bring this to the council at the October 1st meeting. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Brett, it looks like what we've done is we've taken the original proposal, we've broken it down to 2 amendments,
Yes.
different contracts. Where are those contracts?
Is there amendments to our existing original contract?
Well, I know, but you're going to be asking us to approve an amended contract, and we don't have the contracts.
The contracts will be in your packet.
For the October 1st
First meeting.
council
Any
meeting.
reason we don't have them now?
I prepared it Friday. Yeah.
Doesn't give us a lot of time to review them. I would have preferred, I mean, if you're going to bring us information, let's try to bring all of it if you could in the future, please. Thank you.
Councilor Olberg.
Theoretically, we've already reviewed those contracts.
Yeah, we just split out the
You know, my comment about this is I was very skeptical about EnviroIssues and going through that process very early in the stage of the process. years ago, and I don't know how many members of the council were even involved in that at this particular time, but having gone through that, I became a believer in, like, Erin, I don't remember her last name.
Erin Taylor.
Yeah, and how she guided the public through this and guided us through the process. And it kind of reminds me of a saying that once the service has been rendered, the value diminishes. And so it's easy to forget the value now as opposed to looking back and forward now to where we want to go with the next step of the park improvements. I'm on board for bringing them into this thing and keeping the momentum going.
Councilor Shabady.
Thanks. Mine's a couple of simple comments. As far as the website, let me back up. I appreciate the public involvement. I think that's critical. Let them weigh in on phase one. Hey, what do you like? What do you not like? I don't know how much money I want to throw at a website. I don't know if people are really going to go to the website to learn more, or I'd rather spend that money on marketing the charrettes and the community involvement to draw people in. I mean, I guess we want some kind of information. I don't know how much is budgeted for that, but I don't know. That was just one thing that stood out to me as far as it was important, because the clean water facility was such a long process. There was so much material you could go there and get. My hope is we're going to go through this design process. Here's what we're doing. We'll gather all that input, public input, and then we'll build something. But that's just my thought. And make sure if they're using social media, I don't remember how much we used it for the clean water facility.
We avoided it for the clean water facility, and that's one discussion that I would like to 5 years ago, social media was different, and
Right.
we've talked about bringing it into the project over the years, but we are headed down this path, and that's one of the initial discussions is as we move forward, how much do we want to use social media or versus a website? The tools, I talked about tools, that's one I think we should talk about. We've had reservations about it in the past for various reasons, for public records reasons, those type of things, but I personally think it's time for us to try to use those tools, and how do we do that?
Well, I think through, Smarsh, all of our Facebook posts are captured, so I don't know why we couldn't utilize it, but specifically posting to the one site, there's several of them out there that would be out in the community, for example. You want to see something get traction one way or the other, just throw, Hal Hovey presented at the Parks Board meeting a very basic comment. What more would you like to see in the, I think it was a kids playground or something, and I should have brought that. It had over 1,800 engagements, I believe, is what he presented to us in a very short period of time. And most of them are positive. Of course, you're going to have anyone who says they weren't invited to participate, that's where they'll be. So we want to make sure we hit them right up front. But that's just a very simple and free way to contact a lot of people and make sure they're informed as to what's going on.
From the project team point of view, I talked to Fire Issues about it earlier this year, and I says, when we move forward, we need to bring that strategy in. They've got a lot of great experience with it, so that's one thing I want to talk about initially is if we do that, how do we do it, and how we implement it.
Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe that there was and there continues to be value with what Enviro Issues has provided for us. I was skeptical in the beginning. We hadn't broken this out. I was very pleased to meet with you both earlier this week, and I think I have it right here. This is what you provided me. I've been reading through that. But it wasn't just that. It was the conversations that we had. And moving forward, so we had a grand scope in phase one, and some of that has been a little bit liquid, and so that has changed what we were able to do, what we weren't. Phase two now, there's going to be some expansion, possibly contraction, and as Mr. Spady said, it is important to get public input on that. As we move forward beyond phase two, I think our scope is going to be limited. The necessity for a lot of input at that point is also going to be narrowed. So I'm going to support this moving forward with the plethora of information I now have to support it, but also with the understanding that moving forward, I would like to see Enviro issues phase themselves out of the job, with the city at least.
And they're willing to help us take that responsibility on themselves. We've talked about it. We talked about it last November. We'd love to have our own capacity in-house, and they're willing to help us transition to that.
Anyone else? Could you go back a slide? So I think what I've been hearing is when they expire when these two amendments expire on July 30th, 2020, it'd be nice for council to understand what we're gonna have at that point, And, I mean, will there be an expectation for another amendment?
Yeah, that's, remember,
maybe-
we hired Enviro Issues under the MSR, and we have an internal limit of $200,000, so we're gonna be hitting that limit with these contract amendments. If we decide to move ahead with a public involvement firm, we're gonna have to go out and put an RFP for that and start the process over. So this to me is bringing us to a point where we decide to either go that direction or do it in the staff, or we're in a good enough place we can do it ourselves.
Sounds good, yeah. Okay. I think that covers that. We will move on to our last section, affordable housing sales tax credit. Affordable housing state sales tax credit for local government. And we've got our city administrator covering this one.
Yep. In the interest of time, I'll try to speed through this rather complex issue. I gave you a lot of data, so hopefully you had some chance to look at that. This comes out of a legislation from the last session here in 2019. It's kind of an innovative thing where they gave us some funding and one of the clarities here is it's part of the 6.5 that they already give, so this isn't new taxes. Some of the credit here, people think about taxes and I could think about new taxes. There is a component option of additional taxes, but from the state, this is all just about the credit we get on existing taxes and not creating new taxes. So I gave you three information here, AWC, MRSC, and then the Island County did some coordination with them, and they had a law group that gave some information. So those are kind of my sources here. Permitted uses, primarily for acquiring and constructing low-income housing. It's means to test it on the bottom there, so it's for people that are 60% below the median income of the county imposing the tax. So, and then for smaller cities and counties, they have the flexibility of doing rental assistance. They throw that in there for the smaller areas. So, overview here. They're still determining the maximum we have, so I'll have some estimated numbers in here because the state fiscal year hasn't closed yet. So earliest possible use of the funding is now, this fall. You can do some before the deadlines. You can start filing for that in 30 days. You can start getting the credit. So this tax credit is for 20 years. And the city, there's some components here when I talk about the matrix later on. It's important for us to know what the county is doing and for the county to know what we are doing so that we can maximize the amount of money and the credit together. So the county's applying for all the credit, and I'll kind of explain a little bit further here. The two components here, there's a full authority and a split authority. Next, probably the big question is how much money are we talking here? So if the city does the most complex issue and has qualifying taxes, that means we'd have to implement, we don't have any right now, some levies or some sales tax that are related to low-income housing. Then we can get the higher amount. What I'm more leaning towards, and I'll kind of explain this in the option here, is the easier one is for us to simply do the half or the split authority, estimated at $34,723. We don't lose it because the county's going to grab the other part that we're not grabbing in this equation. So here's kind of the matrix here of all the options, and that kind of helps you go through the scenarios here, and I'll kind of break it out. How it's working, and it kind of breaks out the rates there. I talked about it. If the county wasn't going to grab anything, or if we grab the full amount, then the county doesn't get anything. I'm leaning towards a split area, or we can just defer it all to the county and let the county grab all the money. I'm going to go through, slow me down, or give me some questions at the end. I'm just going to fly through this as fast as I can. We can do nothing. The assumption is if we do nothing, then the county and us both lose the money. We could simply just let the Department of Revenue know that we're not going to have an intent to collect this funding from SHB 1406, and then the county will just grab it all. They'll pick up all of our share, and then we don't have any say in it, and we don't have any input. And the other option is we can pursue the full authority. We're just drawing money away from the county because they already qualify for the full authority. So they'll get that other split amount if we don't grab it all. And then we have the burden of doing a qualifying tax credit. And then because we don't have anything in place, it's going to require us to do a referendum. It would take a special because you would have to do it in a February or a April special election, and then we already had numbers on this and talking about referendum, so I was able to utilize it. Estimated cost is $15,000 to $35,000 for an additional $34,000, almost $35,000 in revenue. So just really not practical. And this is really an option for cities that are already really in the business of providing low-income housing, affordable housing. So for us starting off, it's just more difficult to go. So the option, I kind of put it at the end to kind of fly through this. The option I'm looking at here, and I think staff recommends this option, is we pursue the half split authority. We don't have to do the extra taxes that are allowed. We get almost $35,000 a year. Like I mentioned, this is an estimated amount because we don't have the actual cap numbers yet. It just requires us to file a resolution of intent and then adopt an ordinance subsequent to that by July 28, 2020. And then the county's already offered to do a interlocal agreement with us, and we would just do an interlocal that gives us an input, and at the same time it utilizes county expertise because we don't have staff that do housing. They already do. It dovetails in, so I kind of feel that that's the best win, and that's what we're going to promote to that. And then just kind of wrapping it up, I went through this pretty fast. Dates. If you look at the three presentations, they're slightly different with each other. So I just kind of went off the county's presentation here and using those dates. So we can file earlier. Right now, if we were to do this, we'd pursue and we can get funding earlier. But if we do nothing, then we lose this funding if we don't do anything by the January 28, 2020 date. And then if we wanted to do a qualifying tax credit to get an additional amount and kind of draw it away from the county, so we have more control of it, we would have to do that tax before July 27th, and then we'd have to do an ordinance by July 28th. So flew through this really fast. Questions?
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. It seems pretty straightforward. The presentation was great. The information that we got, it mirrors that. Basically, we have to fill out the paperwork for $35,000 to use towards affordable housing, and the only way to get double that is to try and throw a new tax on the books, which will cost us quite a bit of money to roll the dice. And if we lose that referendum, then we lose that money. So I recommend we move forward with city staff's recommendation and register our intent by the due date.
All right, it's kind of easy. So we'll pursue that probably on the 15th of October. We'll have a resolution with our intent to go ahead and draw the split amount, the lower amount that we don't have to do a lot of other work, and then we'll subsequently enter pursuing an interlocal with the county on that funding.
Okay. Move on to city administrator report.
open that up and I'll try to fly through that too. I can talk fast if I want. Sometimes, starting off, I'm just going to go through a few areas. Community support with the school openings. I was able to do some, I wasn't able to make the first main week, but I was able to make the September 9th, the specialized school, and the September 16th reading. That was really fun. Attended leadership, community leadership forum, hosted by the Secretary of the Navy. The mayor and I attended that, very informative. It's a good opportunity for me to advocate the Navy connection for sewer. So I plugged that to the SECNAC. Is that how I said it? NAVSEC. I gotta get that right. I never get this right. So, and then moving on, real exciting here on economic development, broadband backbone proposal. We have completed the interlocal with giving them $5,000 for matching funds to the Cupo Port Authority, and they are working on the study. So there'll probably be some forum groups that'll be done, and I'll probably utilize the 2 people who are on the communications council members that are already on that, unless there's some idea to get some other people. But those 2 people kind of have the expertise. And that's Councilmember Joseph Adius and Councilmember Beth Munns are the 2 people on that I'd probably utilize. Already started some discussion with Anacortes on wet fiber. That's something you'll see coming forward here. Looking on 2 proposals here, kind of a sharing of a line in their territory and our larger line between Sharps Corner and the bridge, the Deception Pass Bridge, and then possibility of an installation of wet fiber from the bridge to our large tank on Alt Avenue. To make it more simple, I think we can justify this initial improvement or addition to the line and inserting to the line as water only, and then we would be doing it for communication, telemetry, and leak detection, and then it would have the capacity in the future of switching over to wet fiber and opening it up. But we're not ready yet on that component, but it kind of puts us ahead on that, and then we can kind of work on the next succession there, next steps there. One of the things I did put on there in economic development too is promoting the LTAC. We have a county LTAC grant and also a city LTAC grant for our marathon to help funding with that and help with promoting there. I did give you a copy in my report, an attachment of the Kaizen Lean report from the Office of Washington State Auditor's Office. So kind of given that in advance, I anticipate more discussion on that at the October 23rd workshop. One of the areas I'm going to talk about is the proposals 1, 2, and 3. One's pretty much all those components in there are pretty much implemented. So weekly unified meeting, some other components. So we've really already started doing some stuff for that. Staff's really looking at technology, implementing Bluebeam and looking at other technology. So I think there's some really good synergy that's continuing, and I really thank the various staff members for really wanting to be more innovative and to streamline our process. So moving on to one of the goals for developmental services with the JPA, we do have the county meeting on October 2nd. They talked about it as a joint meeting. It was a little easier for us to do it as a presentation meeting and then just inviting the council as a quorum. So there'll be a quorum notice if everybody comes. A little easier to deal with it that way, and that's the way we went ahead and did it. Marina, I think it was interesting that their summer high usage was 96%, so congratulations. I appreciate the effort there. And then moving down, police department hired 2 entry-level positions going to the academy real soon. And then Public Works, continuing negotiation with Harbor Heights. We've made some major progress, and you'll see that on the October 1st agenda, the progress we've made in Harbor Heights purchase. And then wrapping up, member appreciation lunch. And that concludes my report. Any questions?
Councilor Olmsted.
A couple of them. One very quickly. On the development services, you got the JPA meeting with Island County. You say JPA, UGA. I didn't know we were going to have a discussion on UGA.
It's just JPA.
Huh?
It's just JPA.
Just JPA.
Yeah.
If I could, the name on the our docket, based upon the council's action, is JPA/UGA, but
Okay.
our conversation with the county is just JPA.
Just
Thank you.
Okay. And then, you know, on the marina, I'm curious about, maybe this is the wrong time to talk about it, but is there a limit on the number of liverboards down there?
Yes.
Yes.
A percentage of, a number of people or number of boats? What is-
Number of boats, Mr. Alberg, and it's established in our DNR lease. If I remember right, I think the number is 40.
40?
Yes.
It seems like there's some, almost like multifamily living on. a couple-
Well, I know that Chris monitors it
Monitors, yeah.
very closely because, again, we have a limit that's set by DNR, and we certainly don't want to exceed it.
No further questions or comments. Thank you.
Councilor Servades.
Thank you. Marina question, last line there, .09 grants. I know that the Island County came back and wanted a business plan. Is that what that's alluding to, or where are we at with that process? If you can
There's a
share?
couple of grants. We also have a feasibility study going on quarter with the grant too, so he's probably leaning more with the discussion on the feasibility component that the county's coordinating. But we do also have the county economic development grant with the early discussions on, and we're looking at appraisals for the property, for the boatyard property and acquiring that property. Quite a lot to take on, but we've got the state money of almost 320,000, and then we've got probably a hold on the county. They wanted more information, so we're kind of utilizing the money for the county to do about $30,000 to $40,000 possibly in appraisals and assessments of that property to get some harder numbers, and that's what the county's looking for, and then we can get more of a substantive plan of action, and then once we have some acquisition issues, we can kind of plug in a business plan too, so that'd be a component, but it all wraps together. There's environmental concerns with that property, so we'll probably have to do phase 2. Phase 1 probably won't even be enough, so a lot of negotiations, a lot of discussions already with the DNR on that issue, and so I think it's an exciting opportunity. It's got to make business sense to us, and we really need grant funding to make it work. So I don't think we want to do it on the payers for the recreational marina. It's got to be separate, so the grant money is really imperative for us. But the county seems to be interested in it. We kind of threw it in at the last minute. Remember, we amended we're looking at a boat launch, and then we kind of modified it to actually a purchase of a facility there. So it's an exciting opportunity, and I think we'll continue to push it forward on it with the leadership of the mayor and help with staff, with Steve and Chris have done a good job of partnering all together with us and working through the complexities of the DNR and the Department of Commerce and also with the county.
Yes, Councilor Larson.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
I think we're done.
Can I vote too?
Wait.
No.